What's up? Happy Friday. I'm glad everyone's made it through the week. I am here to recap all of this week's news. Welcome back to the Sixth Sense News Report.
I'm not your gossip girl, I'm the headline. Truth with a curve, baby, redefine. Welcome to the thirst trap. All the truth looks good in a tight wrap. We talk love, power, soul, and sin. Turn the world on, let the light in. Yeah, the thirst trap news. You'll drink it up, it's the real you. They've been trying to thirst world news, where every headline's a revelation.
All right. Well, welcome back to the Sixth Sense News Report, the show where we look at the headlines, then ask the question the mainstream media never seems interested in asking. Okay, but what's really going on? This week has been one of those weeks where the official story that we've been getting, out of the headlines and the obvious story are two completely different things. Trump is basically publicly rebuking Israel this week and telling them to stop turning Lebanon into a parking lot. He even suggested Syria should handle Hezbollah instead. Imagine telling the Middle East to clean up its own room for once. Oh my God. It's like fresh air on a sunny, warm mountain day. That's basically, like telling your adult cousin he's finally responsible for his own bail money. Let's look at this video before we go further. Oh my God. Of course. Not before we have to watch an ad. A ridiculous ad. But this article basically outlines, how ICE...
Gas prices across the U.S. are below $4 a gallon for the first time in months. Not that much below, but still good news. The national average price for regular gasoline dropped to $3.99 on Thursday, according to AAA, about 3 cents lower than Wednesday. This marks the first time the U.S. national average gas price has fallen below $4 since March 30th. Iran's closure of the Strait of Hormuz in late February cut off roughly 20% of the world's oil supply, sending crude oil and gasoline prices sharply higher. The national average peaked at $4.56 a gallon on May 21st before beginning a pretty steady decline as expectations grew that negotiations would lead to the waterway reopening. The friendship between the governments of Israel and the United States goes all the way back to Israel's founding, but right now the chummy camaraderie is showing signs of strain amid what will hopefully be the end of the war with Iran. Many Israeli officials have ripped President Trump for the peace deal, and some Americans have too, of course, but word on the street is that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is among those not happy with his friend, President Trump, because of this deal with Iran. A lot of this chatter prompted Vice President J.D. Vance to fire back on Thursday.
If I was in the cabinet of the Israeli government, I might not be attacking the only powerful ally that I have anywhere left in the entire world. The problem for Israel is not Donald J. Trump. And anybody in Israel who thinks their biggest problem is the president of the United States needs to wake up and smell the reality of the situation that country is in.
What specifically is Israel irked about, and what does this all mean for broader relations between the two longtime allies? The Post's Washington reporter Caitlin Dornbos got me up to speed.
So Israel is very upset with the Memorandum of Understanding. The officials that I've spoken to today, they understand that the United States is sovereign, it can make its own decisions. However, there are some things in this document that are making decisions for Israel, and it is Israel's right to do whatever it is that they want to do for their security. The document, as we know, it ends the war on all fronts, and that includes Lebanon, where Hezbollah and Israel are engaged. The Iranians have pressed for Israel to withdraw its troops from southern Lebanon, but Israel has said, no, we need these here for security. And reportedly, it's been an issue of tension there. And so what's happening now is that the Israelis are also kind of reeling from the fact that the memorandum of understanding does not address its issue that it needs for Iran to be limited in its ballistic missile stock. And also, it doesn't actually confirm that Iran is going to be fully denuclearized. The deal only says that the US and Iran will start to talk about denuclearizing Iran, really, other than the fact that Iran pledged they will never pursue a nuclear weapon. But words from Iran is doing nothing to ease Israel's tensions for obvious reasons.
The University of California is under fire for a policy that punishes students who don't use their peers' preferred pronouns. And now a lawsuit filed by conservative watchdog group Defending Education is trying to end that. The document under scrutiny is UC's sexual violence and sexual harassment policy. It lists intentional or repeated use of a name or pronoun inconsistent with the individual's gender identity as an example of harassment. Another section of the policy lists derogatory slurs related to sexual orientation as another example. Defending Education claims in its lawsuit that verbal speech like that is legally protected, and they go on to accuse UC's policy of being overly broad, pointing out that harassment can occur online or via text message and not just on campus. The suit also argues the penalties are too severe, including expulsion from the UC system, revocation of academic degrees, and bans from certain campus activities and locations. The Post reached out to the UC system, but it did not immediately respond to a request for comment. For more on these stories.
All right. So, meanwhile, all that's going on, ICE has continued to ramp up enforcing their operations while, of course, anti-ICE activists escalate their confrontations with ICE around the country. Federal indictments, have dropped this week against the individuals accused of coordinating disruptions of immigration enforcement activities. 15 of them. And while everyone's busy arguing over who should be offended on social media today, the real power moves are happening behind the curtain. Borders, military alliances, foreign influences, energy corridors, and who controls those corridors. Tonight, we're covering the stories beneath the stories, because at 6 Sense News, we don't just read the headlines, we read the room. Trump tells Israel to back off. This week's biggest geopolitical shocker came when President Trump publicly criticized Israel's ongoing war against Hezbollah. Not only did he criticize it, he suggested Syria should handle Hezbollah instead. He said that Syria would do a better job, of assisting Israel's campaign. That Israel's campaign has basically become too deadly. And reports have also surfaced. Hold on one second, y'all. Reports have also surfaced of Trump's expressing basically frustration with Israel's leadership, warning that America has to keep Netanyahu basically a little bit safe.
I'll tell you what, Israel's fighting Hezbollah too long and too many people are being killed. And you don't have to knock down an apartment house every time you're looking for somebody, because there are a lot of people in those apartment houses, and they're not all Hezbollah, that I can tell you. And I suggested to Israel to let Syria take care of Hezbollah. Because to be honest with you, I think they do a better job of doing it.
Is Netanyahu on board with
And I didn't like Syria. I didn't like where 2 hours before we're signing the agreement that there was an attack in Lebanon, in Beirut. It wasn't like in the southern side, and it was in Beirut. I did not like that. I let them know that. I didn't like it, not at all. But I think that Syria, he's pulled that country together amazingly quickly. He's very capable, and he's been very good for me. He's protected everything that I've asked for. He's done. And if Israel can't do the job without killing everyone else, he'll do the job. Syria will do the job.
Are you frustrated with Netanyahu, sir?
No, we had a great relationship. We're talking about some end details. I didn't like that he did an attack based on there's a very minor little thing with some drones that were released, and he ends up doing I saw that attack. I saw where that bomb went. Did you see what happened? That was a vicious, that was too much. You can do too much also. Mm-hmm. But we've had a very effective relationship. Without the United States, there would be no Israel. Without me, there would be no Israel, because no other president was willing to do what I did. I've had a great relationship with Bibi, but now Bibi has to be more responsible with respect to Lebanon. Lebanon used to be a great country. It was a country where you had professors, doctors, lawyers. The great intellect was in Lebanon. Now it's terrible. I would say of all countries, they've been treated the worst. And they can't defend themselves. And they have Hezbollah, which is a problem for them. So, no, I'm not happy with the way Israel has handled themselves with Lebanon and with Hezbollah. They should have been able to do the job faster. It just goes on forever. And when that happens, it throws a negative light on the big deal, and that's the deal with Iran. So when you ask me about Bibi, an unbelievable relationship. But Israel would have been blown up a long time ago had I not gotten involved. I'll tell you what, Israel's
For years, we've been told America's role is to solve every conflict that exists on Earth. Maybe it's time the Middle East starts solving Middle Eastern problems. If Syria wants to deal with Hezbollah, let Syria deal with Hezbollah. If Israel can't conduct a military campaign without leveling entire neighborhoods and creating international outrage, then perhaps it's time for a different strategy. And honestly, this isn't really about Lebanon. This isn't really about Hezbollah. And it's definitely not about humanitarian concerns. It's about influence. It's about energy. It's about who controls the future of the region. We can pretend that these interventions are always about noble causes and removing bad actors. Maybe sometimes they are, but oil, trade routes, military positioning, and great power competition always seems to show up to the party eventually. And lurking behind every move in the Middle East is the same uncomfortable reality: Russia. Because every major move in that region eventually affects Moscow's interests, China's interests. This feels less like a humanitarian mission and more like Game of Thrones with pipelines.
My name is Josh Breslow, and as we get to the latest on the conflict in the Middle East, you can see on the right-hand side of your screen a live look over Beirut, Lebanon. Now, I do want to pop this up on your screen. This is coming in from the Israel Defense Forces. It says, watch, a Hezbollah launcher firing rockets toward IDF soldiers in response to Hezbollah's repeated and blatant ceasefire violations. The IDF struck 2 Hezbollah command centers, 80-plus terror targets in southern Lebanon, and eliminated dozens of Hezbollah terrorists. Now, we do have the video itself that I want to pop up for you on your screen. Again, just coming in from the Israel Defense Forces a short time ago. Again, it's about 7, maybe 8 seconds in length, and you can watch as all of that gets underway here. Now, also want to pop this up on your screen as we take a look. The IDF also saying another blatant ceasefire violation as a result of an explosive drone impact in southern Lebanon. An IDF reserve officer was severely injured, and 3 reserve NCOs and an NCO were lightly injured. This incident follows numerous blatant ceasefire violations by Hezbollah. Just last night, 4 IDF soldiers fell in combat against Hezbollah in southern Lebanon. Hezbollah has showed time and time again it is not committed to the ceasefire, but to causing instability in the region. Right now, what I want to do is talk a little bit more about the situation here and break it all down for you. So let's bring in Seth Frantzman, adjunct fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, to talk all about it. Seth, thank you so much for taking the time to be here with us today.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. And first off, I want to start by talking to you about the situation that is now unfolding there over in Beirut. We know that President Trump had said that there was going to be an end to Israel striking Beirut, to targeting the Hezbollah terror group as part of the deal, the memorandum of understanding that's been put into place. Can you explain for folks out there how all of this kind of factors in and whether there is the potential that this could cause bigger issues?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you've got several different, wars that have been taking place at the same time. You have the U.S. and Israel, fighting Iran since February 28th of this year. You have 985 days of conflict in which Israel's been fighting Hezbollah and Hamas basically since October 7th and October 8th, 2023. So you have several different multi-front wars. Most of them are, Israel fighting against Iranian-backed proxies like Hezbollah. And what we've seen then in the recent discussions relating to the Iran kind of MOU and the discussions of a deal with the U.S. is that Iran wants to drag Hezbollah and Lebanon, into this deal so that it can basically protect Hezbollah and get Israel to stop operating against it. So it wants to see a ceasefire there in Lebanon. And the Trump administration has been also saying to Israel, listen, we'd like Israel to kind of tone down, some of the attacks in Lebanon and reduce them. And so there was supposed to be a ceasefire. And then, as you mentioned, Hezbollah killed 4 soldiers last night, including an officer, a battalion commander. So, Israel's retaliating. And the question, I guess, then is whether or not, this is going to create another crisis or whether or not Israel retaliate. And then that will kind of end that. And then there will be discussions with the U.S. and Iran and kind of try to smooth things over.
And that kind of leads me to my next question. Is there anything to read into when you look at the fact that, of course, the memorandum of understanding between the U.S. and Iran has already been signed by President Trump. It's been signed by the president of Iran. But now you have this situation. And then what we know was supposed to be some talks taking place over in Switzerland where Vice President Vance was expected to attend. That now has been scrapped, at least for now. Vice President Vance saying he's not sure when he's going to travel over to Switzerland. We're waiting to get additional details on that. President Trump is going to head over to Camp David later on today for the weekend. Anything to read into that canceled trip right now?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think we've seen this happen before, right? Iran has a kind of way that it negotiates or does deal making, which is what Iran does is once the deal's there, then Iran always wants to put extra things into the deal at the last moment. Just like a used car salesman might say, okay, well, great, you like the car, but what about the wheels or something? So, Iran is really good at this. And what it's doing now is it's saying, okay, great, the United States has signed on the MOU. Everyone was happy. There's supposed to be celebrations. And now, of course, the Iranian-backed proxy Hezbollah is carrying out this attack, which then creates a crisis so that Iran can claim, okay, now we're not going to go to Switzerland, and that could potentially embarrass, the United States vice president if he were to show up and they weren't there. So of course he's not going to go as well. So then the question is, can Iran use that to pressure the U.S. to try to get the U.S. to pressure Israel to stop any sort of retaliation in Lebanon? And of course, the real question that probably should be asked is whether or not the U.S. can be pressuring Iran to get Hezbollah to stop these attacks. And I think that's the real thing that we're seeing is that Iran uses these proxy groups, these terrorist groups, to carry out attacks, and then Iran says, well, it's not us. But then Iran at the same time is saying we want the Israelis to abide by the ceasefire in order for the U.S. to go to Switzerland. So.
All right. Seth Frantzman, of course, we continue to follow all of these developments, and we are taking a live look at this hour over Beirut. And you can see things do appear to remain calm right now. As all of this kind of progresses, what are some of the maybe key points, the information that we should be watching right now as far as events go?
Well, it's just an incredibly, I think, complicated aspect of this, as I said, 985-day, multi-front war. So we need to see, for instance, what is Hezbollah doing? Are they going to continue attacks? Are they rebuilding their forces? What about the U.S. Brokering talks between Israel and Lebanon? That's been something the U.S. has been trying to do, which is get, Israel and Lebanon to host talks in Washington and push forward with some sort of a deal. But that would require Lebanon and the Lebanese armed forces, which have been backed by the United States, to kind of, disarm Hezbollah or remove Hezbollah. And the Lebanese armed forces have not shown that they're willing to do that. And there's talk now about having the Lebanese president go to Washington, and that would be great. But again, the president of Lebanon needs to step up because Lebanon is a country, but it also has this terrorist group within it, Hezbollah, and it's just like cartels in Mexico or something. But you can't allow cartels in Mexico to be killing U.S. soldiers, just like you can't have Hezbollah killing Israelis. So I think that's an important key point. And then we have to see how this plays into the Iranian deal with the U.S. because it's clear that the Trump administration would like to tone down all these conflicts. The Trump administration has been quite good at getting ceasefires and peace deals over the last year and a half. So we have to see if they can kind of iron this out.
And one thing that I wanted to bring up here, and you kind of touched on this right there, but I want to go a little bit more in depth because not everyone is familiar with all of this out there. They're getting the bits and pieces of information as it's coming in. One thing that's important to note is that we've talked about really the talks that have taken place between Israel and Lebanon, but it's not the same when you talk about Hezbollah. We're not talking about part of Lebanon. We're talking about a terror group that is operating inside. So just because Israel is speaking with Lebanon, it's not the same as Israel speaking with Hezbollah.
Well, that's correct. That's why I do the analogy of like cartels in a place like Mexico, or any of these kind of groups you have in South America, where you have kind of what Hezbollah has done is carve out a state within a state that goes back, numerous decades, right? And Hezbollah has immense privilege in this respect because not only is it a terrorist group, Hezbollah has members in the Lebanese parliament. So it pretends to be a political group as well. And Hezbollah claims that it is, quote unquote, resisting Israel. And it's been well armed by Iran over the years, to the extent that, maybe at some points it has better weaponry in the Lebanese army sometimes. So that's the key problem. I mean, you can talk all day, Israel and Lebanon. You can have talks forever, but if you don't have a game plan to get to an end goal in terms of disarming Hezbollah, removing it from certain areas, stopping its influence, then you don't really accomplish much. And I think that's where we've seen Secretary of State Marco Rubio and others talk about, okay, what are we going to do? Can we vet part of the Lebanese army? We've heard talk about pilot programs? Will there be certain areas of Lebanon that Hezbollah is removed from or whatever? So there's a lot of talk. The question is, I guess, when we will see any type of action, and that's the kind of thing the Trump administration probably will want to focus on if they want to keep the ceasefire going, rather than this kind of endless cycle of killing and crisis.
And of course, let's go to talk a little bit about that 14-point plan, what we know, what we don't know. What has stood out to you overall about what we've seen? Because there's a lot that we saw during maybe a previous potential deal and a previous potential deal. Now we have this one on the table. And again, bits and pieces kind of coming in. What has stood out to you about what we know, but also what we don't know?
Well, it does seem to be that this, the Iranians would kind of like to structure a deal this way, because what this is some sort of a memorandum of understanding, apparently, and it sets a clock for 60 days, and then we'll see if they can get to a deal. It does appear that the Iranians always like to slow play this thing. They've done it before. They did it during the lead up to what was called the JCPOA, the 2015 Iran deal. Iran likes to make things very complicated because they know the more complex something is, the more that it's hard to kind of catch them out on violating certain things because it seems so complex. So I think what we're going to see now is, from the United States' interest, obviously, is to open up the Strait of Hormuz, have the trade and the oil moving again, and then obviously from the Trump administration's point of view, having a ceasefire that stays, so there's not as much conflict in the region. And then the question is, can the administration get to the key issues that were raised by the conflict itself with Iran, which is, Israel and the United States saying we don't want Iran to have a nuclear weapon. Okay, well, the nuclear sites were attacked already in June last year. So can some of that enriched uranium, can it be moved out of Iran? Can it be verified where it is? Are inspectors going to go in? That's all very important. And then the question is, what about Iran's ballistic missile program? The administration has said, okay, the Iranians can have some missiles, but how many and what ranges or whatever. I guess that will be an issue to discuss. And the drones and the Iranian proxies, like Hezbollah, like groups in Iraq, the Iranian militias in Iraq. And its key point here is that the Iraqi new prime minister apparently is going to go to Washington soon as well, and the administration will be pressuring them to disarm those groups. So there's a lot of balls in motion, but I think the key issue is that nothing is really settled. We have to wait 60 days. We have to see what comes out of it, and we have to assume that the Iranians are going to play lots of little games to try to draw this out, like they always do, and make these negotiations super complex and make it harder for the United States or Israel to kind of pin them down and say, no, you're violating this. You have to stop doing that.
And my last question here before I let you go, talking about Iran specifically, one thing that has been said time and time again over the past several months is, yes, the U.S. and Iran can agree to this memorandum of understanding. They can hold talks, they can sign different documents, but just because Iran says this is what we're going to do doesn't necessarily mean that that's going to hold up and that Iran is going to hold up its end of the bargain.
Right. I mean, Iran has, there's no evidence generally that in history that it does that. I mean, it always seems to violate things somehow. Now, under the previous nuclear deal, they were supposed to keep the enrichment relatively low, and they kind of did that. But then they took a bunch of money that was freed up by the deal, and they poured it into ballistic missiles and drones and proxies. So Iran is very good at balancing a whole series of threats and saying, okay, well, if you cut off the nuclear issue, then we'll just do these other things. If you tell us not to do that, then we'll do the nuclear thing. So they play it a bit like a piano, and I think we always have to just be aware that that's the way the Tehran regime is always going to behave. It's not going to want to give up on any of this kind of octopus-like grasp it has on the region unless you, bit by bit, cut off those tentacles and then deal with the nuclear program. So we have to see if that full-court press can continue to accomplish those goals.
All right, Seth Brinsman there at the
Anybody in Israel who thinks their biggest problem is the president of the United States needs to wake up and smell the reality of the situation that country is in.
U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance has issued a rare and direct warning to Israel, calling on Tel Aviv to get on board with President Donald Trump's agreement with Iran. In his latest White House briefing, Vance called out Israeli cabinet members for their personal attacks on Trump over the deal with Iran.
What I will say, and this does bother me, is that you've seen people within Bibi's cabinet who have come out and attacked the deal, and in some ways very personally attacked the president of the United States. And I guess my message to them would be twofold. Number one, Donald J. Trump is the only head of state in the entire world who is sympathetic to the nation of Israel at this moment in time. And he happens to be the head of state of the world superpower.
Vance appeared to suggest that Israel had been alienated by global powers in recent years, and that Washington remained its last major ally.
If I was in the cabinet of the Israeli government, I might not be attacking the only powerful ally that I have anywhere left in the entire world. And the second message I would give to some of those cabinet members, Bibi, to his credit, has not gone down this path, but to some of these cabinet members in Israel who are attacking the President of the United States, the other thing that I would say is that over the last 3 months, 2/3 of the defensive weapons that have protected your homeland have been built by American hands and paid for by American tax dollars. The problem for Israel is not Donald J. Trump. And anybody in Israel who thinks their biggest problem is the President of the United States needs to wake up and smell the reality of the situation that country is in.
The remarks appear to be the strongest public display yet of how much the Trump administration's relationship with the Israeli leadership has grown acrimonious since the US and Israel jointly launched a war against Iran nearly 4 months ago. Meanwhile, Trump has also voiced concerns regarding the leadership in Israel, recently telling Axios in an interview that his relationship with Benjamin Netanyahu is good, but we have to keep him a little bit sane. Some Israeli officials have reportedly expressed deep concern about the recently signed Memorandum of Understanding between Washington and Tehran. Analysts say that terms of Trump's agreement to end the war with Iran do not accomplish any of Israel's stated war goals, and in turn, have arguably left it in even worse shape. The deal, among other things, requires Israel to withdraw its forces from Lebanon, a provision which experts say seeks to handcuff Israel in a way that it was not before the war. While Netanyahu himself has not made any public comments about the Iran deal since the signing of the memorandum, media outlets aligned with the Israeli Prime Minister have since criticized Trump and his team, accusing the U.S. President's special envoys, Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner, of selling out Israel for financial gain. A former national security advisor to Netanyahu called it a bad agreement, while a prominent Israeli editor termed the deal a catastrophic capitulation. Earlier this week, Netanyahu addressed the Iran agreement only briefly, telling Israelis, "Additional challenges lie ahead of us." He also stressed that the deal requires calmness, a firm stance on our security interests, and at the same time maintaining the important connection with our American friends. The Israeli Prime Minister also reiterated his stance of preventing Iran from acquiring nuclear weapons.
במשך עשרות שנים, אני נאבק במאמצים של איראן להתחמש בנשק גרעיני. אני יכול להגדיר את זה כמשימה.
He says, for decades, I've been fighting Iran's efforts to acquire nuclear weapons. Right. For decades, they've been on the brink of a nuclear weapon. I can define this as my life's mission. I have upheld it until now, and I will uphold it in the future as well. With or without a deal, Iran will not have nuclear weapons.
עם הסכם, בלי הסכם, לאיראן לא יהיה נשק גרעיני. לא היום.
Not today, not tomorrow. As long as I am Prime Minister of Israel, this will not happen.
ולא מחר. כל עוד אני ראש ממשלת ישראל, זה לא יקרה.
Meanwhile, the U.S. Vice President also slammed Israel's recent decision to launch deadly strikes in Beirut, revealing that the military attacks in the Lebanese capital left Trump frustrated.
What the president gets grown frustrated sometimes is that we seem to be right on the cusp of a major breakthrough in the agreement, and then all of a sudden there's a major explosion that goes off in a civilian population center in Beirut, and a lot of people who have nothing to do with Hezbollah lose their lives. That's not acceptable. That's the sort of thing that we've asked for closer coordination so that we ensure it doesn't happen. And our message to the Israelis, just as our message to everybody else, is fundamentally, we want this peace process to be good for you. We do not want Hezbollah attacking Israel, but in order to ensure that that happens, we have got to actually build the kind of regional framework that can cut off the money to Hezbollah, cut off Iranian support for Hezbollah, and also ensure that Lebanon's territorial sovereignty is respected by all parties.
Vance said Washington expected both Hezbollah and Israel to honor the U.S.-Iran deal, which, he said, was all about regional peace.
So now that brings us to the ICE crackdown. It's getting serious, folks. Federal prosecutors announced indictments against 15 individuals accused of coordinating efforts to interfere with ICE operations in Minnesota. Authorities allege organized surveillance, shocker, blockades, harassment, and assaults against federal agents. Duh.
Today, a federal indictment was unsealed, charging 15 defendants with conspiracy to impede or injure
he's wearing a yarmulke.
officers.
Interesting.
And other charges related to efforts of 2 Minneapolis-based Antifa groups that violently opposed the enforcement of federal law in our state. The defendants are members and associates of Direct Action Minnesota. They are charged with conspiracy to impede or injure a federal officer, solicitation to commit a crime of violence, interstate threats, interstate stalking, assault on a federal officer, and destruction of government property. Earlier this morning, agents of Homeland Security Investigations conducted a coordinated law enforcement operation culminating in the arrest of 12 of the 15 defendants. One defendant had already been in custody on other federal charges. 2 defendants remain fugitives at large. Today's charges and arrests reflect a broad federal effort to address organized, lawless behavior which seeks to disrupt the execution of federal law, endanger law enforcement, and importantly, endanger the very communities that these defendants falsely claim to be protecting. Whether or not they actually, at the end of the day, cause bodily harm is not the measure of whether or not they committed a serious federal crime. And I would dare say, we just cannot have in this country all people getting together, engaging in all of these violent acts, and then simply saying, well, nobody got hurt, so how bad could it have been?
Here's probably where I'm going to upset somebody. And if I do, good, because I feel, and I may be wrong, that a country without borders is not a country. It's a suggestion. Look, peaceful protest is obviously protected, but violence is not. Blocking federal officers doing their jobs is not protected, and that's a good way to get killed. Harassing agents isn't either. Assaulting agents definitely isn't, and whether people like ICE or not, immigration law still exists. So if we decide that laws only matter when we agree with them, we no longer have a legal system. We have mob rule. The left spent years insisting that no one was above the law. Turns out they only meant people they don't like. America has every right to decide who enters this country. Every nation on earth has the same right. And if enforcing immigration laws suddenly makes you controversial, maybe the controversy isn't the law. Maybe it's the politics. Now, the United States announced a renewed ceasefire agreement between Israel and Hezbollah this week, though fighting, of course, still continues. Tensions still remain high, and officials are hoping that the truce will stabilize the region long enough to restart broader diplomatic negotiations.
And welcome back in here too, live now from Fox, as we are following some breaking news here this morning coming out of Reuters and Fox News. Several outlets now reporting Israel and Hezbollah have agreed to a ceasefire set to begin at 4 p.m. local time today. A senior U.S. official telling that to Reuters. And all of this comes
this was 11
after
hours
Israel
ago.
said carried out overnight strikes across the region, while Hezbollah reported heavy clashes there on the ground. And this is just a live look as of right now at the Israel-Lebanon border. As you can see, that smoke is still coming up there as we've been showing this image throughout the morning. Now, here's the statement that we have in here from this official saying Hezbollah and Israel have agreed to a ceasefire. The official saying that on Background, adding that negotiators for the U.S. and Qataris worked out the deal with help from Iran, going on to say we understand that after the exchange of fire earlier today, Israel and Hezbollah are now in a ceasefire. Now, we've also been hearing from President Trump this morning. He posted this before this news just came out. But speaking on Iran, he says the war has diminished Iran. It doesn't any longer have an air force, a navy, anti-aircraft equipment, radar, or practically anything else. And yet the Democrats say that Iran is better off now than it was 4 months ago. Can you imagine getting away with that? How stupid can some people be? The president also posting separately, we didn't meet out of desperation. Iran did. They are finished. We'll play out the 60 days. They get no money, not 10 cents. Now, a lot developing here, as it always is, as we continue to watch everything going on there in the Middle East. So before we bring in Jonathan Sayeh with the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, we wanted to ask you to write in what questions do you have about the conflict there in the Middle East. You can scan that QR code in the top right-hand corner of your screen or head to livenowfox.com/connect. Once again, livenowfox.com/connect. All right, let's bring in our guest, Jonathan Sayeh with the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Thank you so much, as always, for taking the time to join us here with this breaking news.
Good morning. It's great to be with you.
What is your initial reaction to this news? Of course, this is just coming in here, so we only had that preliminary information that I just read off to our viewers. What are your thoughts?
So assuming it's precisely true, and of course the ceasefires with any non-state actors in this context being Hezbollah tend to be rather fragile, but the context that this happened is interesting because we had first initially seen a bit of a backlash coming from Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's office when it comes to a ceasefire regarding Hezbollah. But then again, you saw the MOU that indirectly, MOU between Tehran and Washington that indirectly laid out the term saying any ceasefire between the two countries also extends to quote-unquote allies. So it seems like here the United States is recognizing Hezbollah as a U.S. ally, as a Iranian ally. That's number one, which is very interesting. And two, it shows that the president was able to an extent, restrain Israel and its operations for the sake of the greater deal with the Islamic Republic. So the implications of that are going to be domestic for sure for Netanyahu himself, given that elections are coming up in Israel, and he wants to be seen as the person that was actually going to remove or eliminate the threat coming from Tehran's proxies. But so far, it hasn't really played out like he wanted it to. But you see a bit of a back and forth with Israeli politics domestically over this issue and over the Iran issue as a whole.
And Jonathan, it seems like this news of the ceasefire really came about quite quickly here, given the fact, as I said before I brought you in, we saw these strikes overnight. And this is coming in from Trey Ying saying 4 Israeli soldiers killed by Hezbollah in southern Lebanon. The IDF responded with new airstrikes. How did this all come about so quickly, or was this really just in the works this whole time?
Maybe for us in the outside, it looked a bit more quick rather than it was behind the scenes. These discussions were going on parallel to the talks with the Islamic Republic. We heard months ago that Tehran was directly asking for any ceasefire to also include its proxies, primarily in this context, oftentimes Lebanon, because, of course, the regime has invested a lot of money. It is Iran's crown jewel. It is the most active force against the Israeli operation. It's the main leverage the regime has against the Israeli nation, in addition to missiles and drones, of course. So that's the bigger theme here. But it's the devil is, of course, in the details as to what this ceasefire really concludes. A lot of times, even though there's technically something on paper, it is rather easy to violate such ceasefires, because all it really takes, especially if you're dealing with a terror group or a militia, is one individual across the border firing a rocket or maybe a small drone, and all of a sudden hostilities resume again. So you have rogue elements a lot of times involved in these interactions. As a whole, I think ceasefires tend to last much longer if we see an official announcement coming from the two sides. So far, we have not seen that. It seems like more of a back-channel communication to halt attacks in the short term, which is a bit different than a conventional, officially agreed-upon ceasefire.
And because this did say this would go into effect at 4 p.m. local time, it is officially now in effect here on the East Coast of America. We were just doing the math there on time, so this is now in effect. But my producer Ryan actually had a great question here. She says we can still see that smoke, as we've been showing this image of the Israel-Lebanon border here this morning. Why are we still seeing that smoke? Does that mean that the retaliation is officially going to stop now? She's wondering why we might still be seeing that if this is now in effect.
Usually what happens, and it happens with the ceasefire with the Islamic Republic against Israel as well, this time and during the June 2025 war, oftentimes these countries carry out their retaliatory strikes even minutes before the deadline that the ceasefire is going to be imposed. That's either their way of trying to escalate until the very last minute to send a message that the ceasefire was more or less imposed upon us. We were not desperate for a ceasefire or to just have kind of a pause in hostilities. That's what it a lot of times implies. In other cases, it might actually be evident that maybe a ceasefire has not been holding as aggressively as it should. Sometimes what we see is actually a violation of the ceasefire. And we saw Iran's proxies do that. When there was the ceasefire announced in April, there were a couple of incidents where both from Iranian territory and regime proxies through Iraq were attacking U.S. allies. So again, we have to take it with a grain of salt. This is not a normal nation state that we're dealing with, whether it's Iran or its proxies. But as to why we see the smoke coming right now, it is most likely because the two sides were waiting until the very last minute before pausing their attacks.
All right, and thank you for providing that context here for us, Jonathan. Now, just kind of diving a bit deeper into what we do know here right now, we're told U.S. and Qatari negotiators worked out the deal with help from Iran. What does Iran's involvement tell us about the broader diplomatic effort behind this agreement? And really, is that going to impact the workings with the United States? Once again, Vice President J.D. Vance was set to attend talks there in Switzerland today, and those had been canceled. So what is that all saying?
Well, to answer your first question, the Iranian involvement in any diplomatic measure, here, more or less, the United States agreeing to the fact that maybe Hezbollah should even be part of the conversation would indirectly solidify Iran's influence across the Middle East in itself. It means that the regime was able to put more on the table than we had initially anticipated. When prior to the, recent round of talks, you saw the negotiation go on between the two, the idea was it would be a straight deal, meaning the United States would ease the naval blockade, and parallel to that, the Islamic Republic itself would stop attacking the Strait of Hormuz. But all of a sudden, we saw Iran put more demands on the table, proxies being one of them. So that is really telling. But when it comes to the diplomatic involvement, I think Qatar's role here is the most interesting. They've done everything in their ability to preserve the Iranian regime and trying to de-escalate on their behalf, not to mention Qatar is holding billions of frozen Iranian assets. So in this context, it might also be suggesting that they're more or less involved in the banking transaction should there be sanctions relief for the Islamic Republic. So that's really the bigger theme here. As to why the vice president is not attending, we all have to speculate. It's tough to narrow down one reason. But one thing that is probably very telling is on the Islamic Republic side, I doubt there was any official that wanted their name attached to the deal to the extent that they wanted to travel abroad and actually officially sign it. I think domestically for the regime supporters, they don't want to be seen as making a deal or a peace deal with an adversary here, the United States, that killed their supreme leader, has killed a lot of their commanders, and has caused such a devastating blow. On a PR perspective, it's not great optics for them to begin with. And two, they just might be cautious of a deal. Maybe they're just too distrustful to even think that the deal is going to last. That's why they don't want to officiate it. That could be one reason amongst many.
And Jonathan, we do have some viewer questions I do want to get to. But before I do, I just wanted to ask you, what are some of the biggest challenges that we're going to have to watch for with this ceasefire? Do you think it's going to hold?
It's tough to assess. Oftentimes, they do hold in a short term, meaning when hostilities are at the stake that they are right now for the two sides, it's just a matter of time until they somehow reinitiate the conflict again. So if you look at Hezbollah's capabilities and you look at Israeli capabilities, we are living in a, power dynamic that both sides think they can impose further cost on one another. That was not always the case. Oftentimes, one adversary thinks they have the upper hand. Here, both feel quite emboldened. Israel's feeling very threatened because of the recent agreement that's also extending to Lebanon. On the other hand, Hezbollah's feeling very emboldened, feeling that they were able to, just have their, host country being the Iranian regime stay afloat, and now they think they have more capabilities to attack. So it seems like it's a matter of time until these resume. But I guess both sides could have a few minutes just to, in the military terms, to rearm, to regroup, to re-strategize, and to see what would be the key reasons for resuming hostilities again. What is the long-term goal for each side to attack the other adversary?
All right. You know what the Middle East has more of than sand? Ceasefires. Temporary ceasefires. Emergency ceasefires. Humanitarian ceasefires. Permanent ceasefires that last till lunch. Every few months, somebody signs a piece of paper and the media acts like world peace has arrived. Then 2 days later, everyone is shooting at each other again. A ceasefire is only meaningful if the people involved actually want peace. Too often, it feels like everyone involved is just reloading.
Now the United States and Iran supposed to be kicking off 60 days of nuclear talks to further define the arrangement that would end this war. Vice President J.D. Vance was scheduled to fly to Geneva to oversee those negotiations, but that trip was delayed at the last minute. And officials say the talks were called off due to ramped up fighting between Israel and Hezbollah. But now the two sides have agreed to renew a ceasefire. Max Gordon is live from Dubai. Hi, Max.
Hey, good morning. Well, this latest ceasefire kicked in just about an hour ago. A U.S. official says it was brokered by Qatar, the United States, and with help from Iran. Now, it's important to note that this is not a retreat for Israel from these established security zones in southern Lebanon. And the IDF says that they have every right to defend themselves. And this comes on the heel of heightened fighting in southern Lebanon. Overnight, the IDF reported 4 soldiers were killed and dozens of Hezbollah fighters died. Lebanon reported 21
this
people
was 10
were killed.
hours
This
ago.
latest fighting follows an escalation in southern Lebanon after an Israeli airstrike hit Beirut right before the signing of the deal between the U.S. and Iran. Back and forth strikes have since continued, with the White House sending a message that Israel needs to moderate its response. The deal with Iran dictates an end of fighting in southern Lebanon. Meanwhile, Iran's Supreme Leader Ayatollah Mojtaba Khamenei released his first statement on the deal with the U.S., saying in part it was the American president who, out of desperation, used all kinds of leverage to bring this about. President Trump responding on Truth Social, saying, "We didn't meet out of desperation. Iran did. They are finished. We'll play out the 60 days. They get no money, not 10 cents. And now we're also learning new details about what's going on in the Strait of Hormuz. Iran is now requiring ships to register with the Iranian government and hinting that tolls might be put in place after the 60-day negotiation period. Back to you.
Thank you, Max. We want to bring in Shannon Bream to give us an update and a look ahead to the weekend, because the ceasefires, we know they can be fragile. But also Israel saying, like, if 4 of our soldiers are killed in an attack, we're going to fight back.
Yeah, you guys know how tenuous this whole thing is. And so there is a ceasefire allegedly in place, but Israel says this is on our border. We're going to maintain soldiers in what we call the safe zone, and we will respond to threats as they come in. Now, how that impacts, this domino effect of the talks, we've got Iranian officials now saying what was planned in Switzerland, as we know, it is postponed, but they say that there are plans in the works for meeting in the coming days. So that sounds like they want to get this back on track, but this weekend could be, a very big conditional look ahead at what's going to come.
Absolutely. Let's play this from Vice President Vance yesterday on the issue of Lebanon and the friction and the fighting, obviously, with Israel. Watch.
The Lebanon component, this is about regional peace, right? This is about regional peace. And what that means is we expect Hezbollah is not going to be firing rockets and firing drones at the Israelis. And we also expect that the Israelis are not going to be going wild in Lebanon, right? Both sides have to honor their end of the deal. Now, as you guys know, sometimes these ceasefires are a little messy. The President of the United States said this a couple of weeks ago, that a ceasefire in that region of the world just means they're shooting a little bit less at each other than they were before.
Yeah, I mean, that's certainly true this morning, Shannon.
Yeah, and that's definitely how that has felt in that particular region. So we recognize Israel's right to defend itself and that it has threats on every border there, essentially. So that's part of it. But also you've heard the vice president and the president say, listen, Israel, when you're going to respond, think about proportionality, and we're trying to get this deal done. So can you cool it for a little bit? You remember, too, yesterday the vice president had very pointed messages to many people within Israel saying, you don't have a better friend in the world. We provide you with defense, with aid. We're on your side. So for those elements within Israel who want to come after the Trump administration now, there was very much sort of a brushback push coming from the vice president yesterday.
Shannon, let's switch gears a little bit, because we still have these problems with immigration, and the governor of Virginia, Abigail Spanberger, is getting hit by DHS for urging her not to release an illegal immigrant. And they said Sanctuary Spanberger can't hide the fact that she has turned the Commonwealth into a safe haven for illegal alien crime. And this is what she said, hitting back at ICE.
They say your policies has made the Commonwealth a magnet for illegal alien crime. What's your response to the DHS and DOJ?
Unfortunately, there have been so many circumstances where ICE has had a detainer order out on someone, and they have not bothered to go out and get someone with a criminal history, despite the fact that they have a detainer order. So it is really detrimental and unfortunate that so frequently ICE is choosing not to actually take action on those legal orders.
I'm curious how DHS would respond to that. I mean, is that true that ICE is not doing its job?
Well, ICE has said, listen, we have detainers on a lot of people that you guys have let out in Virginia without letting us come get them. And unfortunately, we have all covered the cases in Virginia recently of people who were killed. The allegations being that the suspects are from outside this country. Some of them had ICE detainers on them that were not honored. I mean, there's one of these cases involving an illegal immigrant who is a suspect in the death of Stephanie Minter, who was stabbed to death at a bus stop. We talked to her mom. In fact, I was sitting in, Dana, for you a few weeks ago on the show, your show, in which the mom talked about the absolute devastation and grief over something that she felt like could have been totally avoidable. So yeah. Virginia has a lot to clean up with, when it comes to respect, a lot of these high-profile crimes involving people in the U.S., not legally, who are the suspects.
Shannon, what can we look forward to? It sounds like it's going to be a busy weekend for you, and we can't wait for Fox News Sunday. So what can we look forward to?
Yeah, so we're going to cover all of the back and forth with Iran and where we are in that process, but we're also going live from the U.S. Supreme Court this weekend because all the big decisions are due within the next week. So we're going to break down what we're waiting on birthright citizenship, how many days past Election Day you can count ballots, all those decisions. We'll have Senator Mike Lee, who's a former SCOTUS clerk himself, and also Democrat Congressman Ro Khanna, who says it's time to pack the Supreme Court. So news of the day and all your legal stuff, too.
All right, Shannon Breen, thanks so much. See you soon.
Have a great weekend, guys.
Be sure to like and subscribe for...
Today, peace between the U.S. and Iran is on hold. The talks were scheduled to happen in Switzerland. Vice President J.D. Vance canceled his plans to travel abroad last night. It happened as Israel continued to strike Lebanon, something U.S. leaders have asked Israel to stop doing.
If I was in the cabinet of the Israeli government, I might not be attacking the only powerful ally that I have anywhere left in the entire world.
Sources tell CBS News a ceasefire is now underway, though plans for an end to the violence are being threatened by the strikes. Natalie Brand has the latest on the peace plan.
Smoke rose over southern Lebanon Friday after what's considered the deadliest attack there since the tentative deal between the U.S. and Iran was reached. Lebanon's health ministry says at least 18 people were killed in Israeli strikes. Israel says 4 of its soldiers were also killed. Diplomatic sources tell CBS News Qatar, the U.S. and Iran mediated a ceasefire now in effect between Israel and Hezbollah.
Can we stop saying Qatar? It's Qatar. It's been Qatar for my whole life. They say Qatar. So you're trying to say it in the accent. Someone said Qatar because of their accent, and now everyone's saying Qatar. No. Qatar.
Hezbollah. Earlier Friday, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu issued a statement saying in part, the IDF will act to thwart any threat to our forces and territory.
Qatar.
President Trump says the U.S. is committed to peace and that he expects a ceasefire on all fronts, including between Hezbollah and Israel. That instability could threaten the larger agreement between the Trump administration and Tehran.
If I was in the cabinet of the Israeli government, I might not be attacking the only powerful ally that I have anywhere left in the entire world.
The vice president announced late Thursday night his travel to Switzerland is on hold, and it's not yet clear when talks with Iran will take place. The White House says the 60-day clock is already underway to discuss the stickier issues of Iran's nuclear program and curbing future enrichment. Lawmakers on Capitol Hill range from highly critical to skeptical.
This is a deal that in many ways does not achieve any of the ends he said.
Let's give peace a chance. We'll know in 60 days.
Iran's top negotiator said Friday that the next phase of talks would be bound by the regime's red lines and warned if the U.S. seeks to be excessive, quote, our fingers are on the trigger. Natalie Brand, CBS News, the White House.
Tonight, Representative Andy.
All right. So, who's really calling the shots? One of the most fascinating developments this week wasn't what Trump said, it was who he said it about. Public disagreements between Washington and Jerusalem have become increasingly visible. And with Trump basically openly expressing frustration over Israel's military decisions, and I agree.
Without us, without the United States, there would be no Israel. Without me, there would be no Israel, because no other president was willing to do what I did.
So, has Donald Trump turned against Israel? Well, a lot of people here are beginning to wonder and to worry, because for a while now, the US president has been their closest and most loyal ally. American and Israeli forces attacked Iran together. Trump
this is Sky News. This is from Australia, so it's left-leaning.
Like a team. Both agreed that Iran could not have nuclear weapons. But then came a widening divide. Netanyahu determined to fight Hezbollah in Lebanon. Trump focused on getting a deal with Iran to reopen the Strait of Hormuz and to ease the pressure on the global economy and, well, let's be honest, to push down prices for American consumers. The problem is those two ambitions don't actually fit terribly well together. Hezbollah, the group pursued by Israel, are backed by Iran, the country that America was negotiating with. And this time, Trump has picked pragmatism over geopolitical loyalty. His focus is on getting the deal done, and he doesn't want Israel to derail it. So he started to criticize both Netanyahu, who he described as effing crazy, and has said that Israel has gone too far in Lebanon, where it has killed more than 3,500 people and displaced more than 1 million.
I'll tell you what, Israel's fighting Hezbollah too long, and too many people are being killed. And you don't have to knock down an apartment house every time you're looking for somebody, because there are a lot of people in those apartment houses, and they're not all Hezbollah, that I can tell you.
Hezbollah and Iran want Israel to withdraw from Lebanon. Netanyahu has said his forces will remain there for as long as necessary. But now he's facing a horrendous political choice. If he does what Trump wants him to and ends the war against Hezbollah, then Netanyahu looks weak. That is catastrophic when he's got an election later this year, and many Israelis do support the campaign in Lebanon. But if he defies the president, then he risks ostracizing Israel's great ally and infuriating a man who is infamous for holding grudges.
Without us, without the United States, there would be no Israel. Without me, there would be no Israel, because no other president was willing to do what I did.
So, how's Donald Trump?
All right, and then the next video.
Here's Donald Trump today at the G7 in Europe describing Israel's behavior.
And you'll see that when you see the agreement, but it's appropriate that we release the agreement. And we did send a copy to Israel, by the way. They've been a good partner. Again,
We sent a copy. Like, the adults were talking. We'll let you know what to do.
I think they could do better with respect to Hezbollah. I'm not saying they shouldn't protect themselves. I'm saying when 2 drones are shot into the desert and dropped harmlessly, you don't have to knock down buildings in Beirut. They could behave better. And frankly, they could do a better job. I love them as a partner. They were terrific, but they could do a much better job with Hezbollah.
Wow. Consider that for a moment. And he said a lot of things like that in the last 24 hours. But just in that statement, he said, by the way, we sent Israel a copy of the agreement. Oh, you sent them a copy, did you? You BCC'd them? Didn't consult Israel. They're a participant. They're our partner in this war. This is a joint war we are waging with the government of Israel somehow. First time in American history that's ever happened. Not a good idea, by the way. Note to self, don't do that again. But as of right now, we are waging a war with Israel, and we just reached the outline of a peace agreement with the country we are fighting with Israel without consulting Israel. We sent them a copy. Bitch. That's exactly what that means. Adults are talking. That's exactly what Trump is saying to Israel. Then he goes on to say, yeah, I mean, I think what they're doing, and I understand you got to defend yourself and everything, but like, it's brutal what they're doing. It's brutal what they're doing in Beirut, in Lebanon, blowing up apartment buildings. At one point, not in that clip, but in another from yesterday, he said, I just think it's just too much. It's just too much. I think going forward, we may leave the fight against Hezbollah to, Jelani, who runs Syria. He's a good guy. Let him handle it. He'll do it in a more measured way. Now, Jelani, of course, is a former al-Qaeda leader who is running Syria, really in thanks to Israeli pressure, because Assad, who is literally a practicing medical physician educated in Britain, he's just too radical, meaning too anti-Israel. So we
watched a documentary on him. He took them further away from Sharia law.
To have the former al-Qaeda leader, al-Qaeda, which they told us did 9/11. I don't know if you remember that. Remember those 19 Arabs with box cutters who killed 3,000 Americans? That was the story anyway. One of those guys is now our ally in Syria. And by the way, that guy, the former al-Qaeda leader, he's just a more reasonable person. He's just more humane than Benjamin Netanyahu. I mean, I like them all. They're all good guys. But really, if you're looking for humane treatment of civilians, you got to go to the al-Qaeda guy, not the Israeli prime minister. That's what the president said. It's unbelievable. If I said that,
you have to
I don't know if I would say
understand.
that. Is that true? I don't even know. I have maybe...
What's he supposed to do? Control every single leader that comes in? I think it's a good thing. Let the Middle East deal with the Middle East.
Less faith in former al-Qaeda leaders than the president does. But if I said that, it'd be anti-Semitism. What are you saying? Well, Trump is saying that the Israelis are such inhumane savages who do not consider non-Israeli life fully human. That's true, by the way, obviously. That we're going to trust the al-Qaeda guy over them. So again, watching all this stuff for the last couple of days, and your instinct, of course, is always to enjoy the hysteria and the suffering of neocons, considering how much suffering they've imposed on the rest of us for the past 25 years. I mean, it's almost incalculable. No group has done more damage to the United States. No group has come close to doing the amount of damage to the United States that the neocons have done over 25 years. So when you see them go totally bonkers and start rending their garments on Twitter, you're like, I kind of enjoying this. On the other hand, you just got to be honest and say, I get it. You went into this thinking this would be the war that allowed Israel to fully take over and control the Middle East. They would have no more real imminent threats. And yet, in one of those ironies that define life, the war ended up radically diminishing Israel, radically strengthening Iran, which you consider the existential threat to Israel, which is absurd, but they think that. They've talked themselves into believing that, some of them. And you lost the only president you had full control over. Trump went from being a slave to Israel to comparing Benjamin Netanyahu disfavorably to al-Qaeda. Man, what a ride. So what's the response from the people who pushed this war, including the ones who called Trump personally on the phone, and there are many of them, who called him on the phone or who used their purchase on Fox News to convince him to do this? What's their response to this settlement? Well, it's completely hysterical, but it's also revealing of their motives and of their wisdom. So here's just one among many examples from Fox News. This is from 2 days ago. This was before we got the actual text of the MOU. This is when its basic deal points were being shared by text, and it wasn't clear how many were real, but it was pretty clear this was not a triumphant victory, and it was even more clear that the current Iranian regime would remain in place by the end of it. Here's the response from a Fox News contributor to the deal. Watch.
This deal and everything that we know about it, to the degree that it is being spun in public by this, and behind the scenes by the administration, everything about this deal seems bad to me. It all seems bad. It all seems like a setback. It doesn't seem like it meets any of the measures that the president actually put out there of his goals when it came to this conflict. And look, at some point, this Republican Party needs to decide which kind of foreign policy it's going to have. Is it going to be an America first foreign policy, one that is bold, that uses American power in key moments decisively in order to affect what it wants to achieve? Or are we going to just backslide into being some kind of hillbilly Obama kind of GOP? That is not something that is acceptable to me. It should not be acceptable to Republicans, and it should not be acceptable to any conservative who is interested in the success of America going forward.
It's amazing to see that if you're one of the overwhelming majority of Americans who no longer pays for a cable package and you're sort of wondering, why are leaders doing these things? Because they're watching stuff like that and they take it seriously. So you put someone on television who has no knowledge whatsoever of the region, hasn't been there, doesn't understand it, is taking almost all of his understanding of it from Fox News. You have the snake eating its tail, is a guy who's believing the lies that he's ingesting and then coming to absurd conclusions on the basis of them. So it's like someone who's no authority to weigh in on this is telling you his august view of it. So there's that. It's childish. But then there's the deeper question of, okay, you don't like the deal. What's the option? What does victory look like? The president articulated it pretty clearly. He wanted regime change. He wanted new people running Iran. He wanted an end to support for the proxies, the terror proxies, Hamas and Hezbollah and the Houthis. Okay. He wanted Iran to stop producing, apparently, ballistic missiles, stop, I guess, having national defense. Okay. And he wanted, famously, total abject surrender. He wanted Iran to get on its back, all four paws in the air and say, do with me what you will. Well, none of those, and that analyst is correct in noting, none of those goals have been achieved. The question is, how would you achieve them? So yeah, the United States is admitting defeat. We did not get what we thought we would get or wanted to get. Some of us never thought we'd get that, but it's not what they promised us. So what's the bold, decisive action that we're not using to get us those things? I'll wait. And of course, there's no answer. There's no answer. Half our THAAD batteries and Patriots have been expended in 7 weeks. Kind of gave it our best shot. What would you do if you were the president? Attack Carg Island? And that's going to do what? There are no options, is the truth. But no one advocating for this will admit that, because if they admit that, then they have to concede that the real goal has nothing to do with what the president of the United States articulated in public in February or March. No, the real goal is the Israeli goal. And the Israeli goal is not regime change or end of the nuclear program. The Israeli goal is chaos, is dysfunction, is an open suppurating wound that lasts for generations. The real goal is Syria or Libya or Iraq, Somalia. The real goal is destruction for its own sake. Any potential rival to your power is so consumed with a tribal ethnic conflict in his own country that he has no ability to resist your territorial expansion. He has no ability even to notice you exist, because he's busy trying to stay alive in the middle of a generational civil war. That's what they wanted in Iran, which is a country of almost 100 million people. So what would be the natural, obvious, well-documented effects of this? Well, migrant crises in Europe, further destroy Europe. Well, that's always been an Israeli goal, destroy Europe. Still mad about Rome in 70 AD or something. Who knows what? But that's the actual goal. But none of the advocates for this war, staying the course, exerting American power, no one in this country will admit it. And so instead, they hypnotize Trump voters with, we have to be strong. We can't appease the Iranians. Okay, what's your plan? No one ever asked that. And if asked, let's say someone actually snuck onto a Fox News set and said, okay, tough guy, how would you do it? What would the next 30 days look like? At what cost? What do you think is likely to happen? You're the same person who told us that killing the Ayatollah, murdering an 80-something-year-old religious leader, was going to collapse the regime. It didn't work. So what do you think will work? And they have no idea, because their real goal is so ugly that they can't say it out loud. So what's in your toothpaste? If you're using the brand you grew up with, you probably don't want to know. The ingredients likely include...
All right. So for decades, basically, questioning foreign policy relationships has been, treated like a forbidden topic. And not anymore. Because Americans are starting to ask a simple question. Who exactly is driving American foreign policy? I think we know the answer to that, who it's been historically. Who is it American voters, or is it Jerusalem? Or is it the international interests? Those questions aren't anti-anyone. They're pro-America. And citizens should always be allowed to ask those kind of questions.
I will not allow Israel to annex the West Bank. No, I will not allow it. It's not going to happen.
Did you speak with Netanyahu about this?
Yeah, but I'm not going to allow it. Whether I spoke to him or not, I did. But I'm not allowing Israel to annex the West Bank. There's been enough. It's time to stop now, okay?
Israel is currently annexing the West Bank, but the president of the
And this was right before Charlie Kirk was killed.
United States would like you to believe that he's not going to let it happen. It's been happening. It will continue to happen. And the American president, who right now happens to be a Republican, but it would be the same if it were a Democrat, is going to be a good boy and let Israel do as it pleases with the resources being provided by the American people. That's the reality of the situation. But let's entertain what Trump is claiming here for a second. So apparently on Tuesday, Trump also met with the leaders of Qatar, Jordan, Turkey, Pakistan,
Qatar,
Egypt, the UAE, Saudi Arabia, and others. And the whole point of this meeting was to, I'm sure, discuss all sorts of foreign policy as it pertains to the Middle East and Israel. And per the Wall Street Journal, an Arab official briefed on the meeting said that though Trump spoke vaguely at times, he was clear that he would try to prevent Netanyahu from annexing the West Bank.
This was back when Trump was saying that Netanyahu doesn't control him. We see how that's aged, right? If our troops, our money, and our diplomatic influence are involved, we deserve answers on what changed.
Benjamin Netanyahu has spent years cultivating one of the most important relationships in global politics. Now, that relationship may be becoming a liability. The Israeli Prime Minister is facing growing political pressure after Donald Trump struck a deal with Iran that much of Israel opposes. The White House says the agreement will ensure Iran never obtains a nuclear weapon and won't be allowed to keep highly enriched uranium. But many Israelis remain deeply skeptical. And the fallout is hitting Netanyahu. His support has slipped as the conflict with Iran drags on and Israel struggles to achieve some of its key strategic objectives. Trump has publicly suggested Israel nearly derailed diplomacy through its military actions against Hezbollah in Lebanon, which, like its patron Iran, is sworn to the destruction of the Jewish state. Critics argue that Israel has become too dependent on Washington and have accused Netanyahu of turning the country into a client state. Credible challengers are also emerging. Former Prime Minister Naftali Bennett is mounting a comeback. But the current frontrunner is Gadi Eisenkot, a plain-spoken former general whose rise suggests that many voters are looking for something very, very different to Netanyahu's personal style. For a politician who built his reputation on security and international influence, the question now is whether those strengths are becoming political vulnerabilities.
Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner sit down with Leslie Stahl, 60 Minutes. Phenomenal interview, must watch. I watched the first 15 minutes and 39 seconds, couple clips that are very revealing. Leslie starts off right off the bat, you can tell it's intense, but Kushner and Witkoff, very, very stable. One of the two stories that was told, which was very interesting, one of them was when she asked about what happened with the president and Netanyahu when Israel attacked Qatar, and it was problematic. And in that response, Rob, I don't know if you have that clip. Is this the clip specific to Netanyahu? Is this the one?
This is where they talk about the Israeli strike during the peace.
Okay, this is the one. This is the one. Go for it.
Oh, look, an Israeli strike
Can't
during
hear
a peace deal.
We cannot hear, guys.
Still can't hear it. Hold on. I hear like a feedback, like a buzzing.
No, it's a clip. Here, I also have this. This is where they talk about the death that Vinny had
No,
mentioned.
go to the other one. I want to go to the other one. Rob, the other one is on 12:30. Just go to 12:30. Yeah, I have it at 12:30. There you go. Go for it. Can you raise the volume? Guys, can we raise the volume?
Oh, no, we're getting a lot of feedback, Rob. Yeah, somebody's making noise.
I have full volume here. I don't know why it's not coming all the way through. But that's on YouTube, too.
Rob, so do me a favor. Is this when we show CBS clips where they do things? Is CBS the one that typically is not happy about things that you show?
Yeah, 60 Minutes is kind of an issue for
Okay,
us.
so then that's what we'll do. So let me tell you what happened. So part of it was that they used the word, they said, did the president force him to apologize? They said, no, he didn't force him. You sure it wasn't forced? No, he says, that's what you call diplomacy. And Jared says that with a smile on his face, right? There's a smile on his face when he's saying that. And then the other part is when there's an exchange and they're talking about, Vinny, maybe you tell this part of the story where Witkoff is sitting there talking to one of the Hamas leaders.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Frog and Crispy.
So, and by the way, it was a fantastic interview by both of them. He's sitting there, and Witkoff says they walk into the room in the Qatar. So it's the Hamas
negotiator, I guess. I mean, if they trust him enough, I don't know what his involvement is, Pat, like what his like level of Hamas, if he's in Hamas. But there was a moment where he reveals that during Israel's attack in Qatar, that this negotiator's son was killed in the attack. And then he had a moment with him. Yeah, that's the guy's name right there, Rob. What's his name?
It doesn't say his name. That's just.
But that's who he is. That's who he is. So then they had a moment because Steve Witkoff had a moment because he goes, we share something in common. My son at 22 years old died of an opioid overdose. And even Jared Kushner says there was a moment, he goes, I wish that there was a camera in the room to capture such a human moment, which actually made them connect. And then he's saying at the end of this negotiation, people in the room were hugging each other. Like it was a moment of like, finally we did it and it's over. We're going to get the hostages back and there's a peace. So there was a great moment. But then Pat, going back to what he said Trump felt that the Israelis were getting a little bit out of control, said Kushner. It was time to be very strong and stop them from doing things that he felt were not in their long-term interest. And that's what he was saying.
Gotta love it. By the way, and how do you feel now, Vinny, about where Kushner and Witkoff are at? What is your feeling about Kushner and Witkoff?
And again, Pat, all we do, because I didn't really do the research of who Witkoff was. I know Kushner, especially with Ivanka, they weren't going to be involved with the thing, with the whole administration. But now that it's coming back, now that I'm seeing at least the diplomacy, at least like, bro, they're going to talk to these guys to try to make peace, and then still having the decency to call out Israel, still calling out Bibi Netanyahu when it's wrong. Like for him to say, it felt, because when he's saying Israelis, he's basically saying Bibi was getting a little out of control. He goes, it's time to be very strong and stop. Like, bro, you got to stop. Like Trump is over here busting his ass trying to get a peace deal, and you're doing this. For them to say that, big props.
By the way, on the podcast, we talked about it. If you remember when I said, what is the likelihood that Trump forced him to apologize? I think everybody here said 100%.
Yep.
If you remember that,
yes.
Right? Well, of course he's going to say, what are you doing? You want me to go negotiate a peace deal for you, but you're doing something like this and getting in the way? Rob, what is this here? Is this, they're giving the update on phase 2?
This is Fox News yesterday reporting that Witkoff and Vance are heading to Israel for phase 2 of the summit.
Go for it.
Phase 2 of this ceasefire agreement of this peace deal was always going to be the bigger challenge.
Something with audio, Rob.
Vice President J.D. Vance was optimistic last week that the ceasefire agreement was the beginning of what he suggested was a new chapter.
You can pause it. You can pause it right there. Okay, so what are your thoughts, Tom, when you're hearing this? What are you thinking?
Well, first of all, it feels like Jared Kushner is 4 years wiser. It feels like the administration is 4 years wiser. And Witkoff feels like a very steady hand in these things. Mm-hmm. And it feels like there's two types of deal teams. One type of deal team is they know that they sell the heroin and you need heroin because you're an addict. And there's nothing to it. The other type of deal, by the way, it happens in business too. You know, you get held up by key suppliers and things like this. The other type of deal team is you really are trying to, as a very famous book says, getting to yes. And working through concessions that are necessary and things that make sense. Not getting to yes at any cost, but getting to yes at the costs that are acceptable for the betterment of all people. And Jared Kushner said something that I thought was very, very strong, where he said, we thought the Israelis were doing things that were not in their own best interest long term. Yep. And part about being an intermediator here is like, look, I know you're going to say to the end of time, you were attacked on October 7th, Hamas bad, you're bombing them back to the Stone Age. I get it. But you're doing some of these other things that aren't going to help you what you want, which is to get peace here and to figure this out. And so I was impressed by what appears to be a very steady hand in Witkoff and what a constant reminder of what we had with Anthony Blinken. And how different this is now. That when you have the right guy on your team. And so I think that Trump's got the right team together, and I think it really feels like Jared Kushner is 4 years wiser. I don't mean that he was, uninformed or incapable 4 years ago. I mean, he's got 4 more years of experience in the machine and out there with these deals. Where are you at with this? That's where I'm at. So everything comes down to let's make with the Gazans. All right, cool. Qatar, what do you want? So he uses this envoy of Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner, incredibly capable guys. Are you freaking kidding me? What these guys were able to do, and they didn't stop until they made a deal. Now, to me, Qatar is the linchpin here because Qatar basically marries oil and wealth and just richness with jihad sympathizing and a home base for Hamas. So to me, is Qatar guilty of sending money elsewhere, sowing discord, doing all these horrible things? At the same time, I can also recognize that they're going to need Qatar to actually talk with the terrorists to bring back the hostages, which they were able to do. So in this instance, what they were upset was they said, dude, you just blew up whatever you did in Qatar. We need them to come to the table. Yeah. Whereas Bibi Netanyahu is basically saying, we're getting attacked from Hamas, the Houthis, Hezbollah, Syria, left, right, center.
Saying Hamas broke the truce. So both sides were pointing fingers.
But you're leaving out the initial part of the story, though, Vin.
No, I'm not leaving out. Adam,
the whole point is 2 Israeli soldiers were killed, and they retaliated.
So are you ready for this? I'm happy that you said that. Let me say my whole point. Israel, both sides are pointing fingers. Israel saying Hamas killed 2 of its soldiers. They came out the tunnel or something. Hamas is saying that a bulldozer was driving and drove over ordnance and it blew up. Okay? So Adam, which gets to my point. Whatever version is, whoever's telling the truth, whatever it is, it proves one thing. There's never going to be peace there as long as Hamas is still around. Okay? They allowed them to stay, I get the peace deal, we got the hostages back, right? Why would you ever negotiate with terrorists at this point? Once they got the terrorists back, this is my opinion, they should have gone full offensive, flood the tunnels, bunker buster, kill all of Hamas, root and stem. But they didn't, and they let them, by the way, didn't they release like 1,200 people or 600 of them? might have been terrorists. It's like, why would you do that? It doesn't make sense. And releasing terrorists and then acting surprised when they do terrorist things again is like tossing a shark in a swimming pool and then expecting him, hoping that he's a vegetarian. It's not going to happen.
To Adam and Vinny, do we know which is which? I saw stories that went both ways that say that a small squad came out from underground and the Israeli soldiers were killed. And then I saw stories that said it was a bulldozer and even the U.S. knew it was a bulldozer. But I haven't.
Here, ISIS, done. Wipe them out. Because now it's almost you're just leaving an enemy hanging around there. Like,
Well,
I don't understand.
Can I give you a quick answer? I'll give you 30 seconds or less. Because Israel actually doesn't want to do a genocide. And that's the whole conversation. Why aren't they going after terrorists? Because the terrorists are embedded within the civilians. So the whole notion that they want to commit genocide, if they wanted to do that, they would just wipe out the whole country.
Adam, but it's flat.
But that's the whole thing.
It's gone. Go in the tunnels.
Yeah, they're in the tunnels. The people are living in the squalor. Listen, Israel has gone out of their way to go door to door to door to door to find the hostages. Now that they have the hostages back, they maybe need to take a little bit more of a presumptuous, aggressive stance. But to me, the moral equivalency is so ridiculous. The fact that whose side did it, only one side is lining up their own people in a firing squad and murdering them.
And why is that?
Whereas the other side is doing anything in their possibility to go get their hostages back.
Adam, because they
to me,
let
the moral
terrorists
equivalency
alive.
is so stupid and unfounded that only morons can't see the difference between Hamas and the idea.
Adam,
And probably, unfortunately, we have so many morons who don't understand that equivalency. They're the ones calling Bibi Netanyahu Hitler. They're the same ones calling Trump a fascist and Hitler. To me, it's so stupid that the people who are doing the Hamas defending and the people who are actually Hamas are the one in the wrong here.
But do you understand what I'm saying, Adam? Kill them. Like, you know why Hamas is shooting Palestinians in the street right now? Because Israel let Hamas
as well. However, on December 12th, every year, I do a one-day webinar for business planning. We call it the Business Planning Workshop. I want to show you a video of two people, see if you recognize the two guys, and see which one you are when people do business planning. One guy's name is Ernie. One guy's name is Larry. They were both annoying.
Okay, that's the end of that. Now we get into the G7 summit. Okay, it delivered plenty of policy discussions, but social media wasn't focused on trade agreements or economic forecasts. They were focused on the photos. One moment that went viral included an awkward interaction between Trump and French President Emmanuel Macron, and viewers dissected every frame of a handshake that looked less like diplomacy and more like two alpha males arguing over who gets the last parking spot. Except I don't see Macron as much of an alpha male since he's clearly with another man. He's kind of soft. And in this clip, it didn't seem like President Trump really wanted to shake his hand. That's Brigitte, the man's wife.
I'm the boss.
Look at him walking away from Macron. He does not like Macron. Trump does not believe that is a man. But she is a man.
Look at yourself in a picture. Well, I have the lowest grade.
You know what? It's the UN.
Oh, that's it?
I'm kidding.
That's funny.
Everybody? Parfait.
I wonder if they're going to show it. It was a really awkward handshake. It was like this.
I'm the boss.
How are you?
Okay. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you.
Trump looks like he's having fun.
In a world flooded with noise, Hope Global delivers clarity.
Let me see if I can find that. Where is that? It was a really weird... Might be this one. Then came another viral image featuring the Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni and Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney. Social media users claim that the pair appeared determined not to be sidelined during a photo opportunity, positioning themselves directly beside Trump rather than allowing themselves to be pushed to the outer edge of the frame. Trump says that the Italian Prime Minister Meloni begged him for a photo. Claimed he agreed only because he felt sorry. I wouldn't have taken it, the U.S. president added. They published a dubbed version of his quotes, and Meloni quickly hit back at the comments. She said that the claims are completely made up.
Well, some things deserve an immediate answer. Donald Trump's statements are totally made up. They are, to be frank, a lie. I don't know why the President of the United States behaves like this with his allies. It's not the first time it happens. I can only say that I'm sorry that he doesn't have the same determination with the enemies of the West, with the enemies of the United States, with the leadership with which, instead, he proves to be much more condescending. But one thing must be remembered. Italy and I never complain.
She says she is astonished that he would make such a claim. And says that he treats Western enemies far better. Neither I nor Italy ever beg. And then here's this video. Hot mic moment.
The G7 summit is underway in France, and already a hot mic moment between Prime Minister Mark Carney and U.S. President Donald Trump is making major headlines. Let's bring in our Glenn McGregor from Ottawa. And Glenn, you were listening very closely to that exchange, and it sure seems to be a significant one.
Yeah, every once in a while, Cynthia, we get to peek beneath the veil and hear what world leaders at these big international summits actually say when they think that the microphones are off. And today, right before a roundtable session of G7 leaders, Mark Carney, in that video, and it's hard to hear, but he was seen sort of leaning over a seated Donald Trump and chatting about what sounded like were Trump's concerns over a Canadian agreement with China. Now, Carney was heard on the live mic saying, and I quote, "Less than 3% of our market, 49,000 cars, it's a cap, a hard line." That is clearly a reference to the number of electric vehicles that Canada will allow China to sell into our market in exchange for China reducing tariffs on canola and other Canadian agricultural and seafood products. Now, Trump sounded actually pleased, telling the Prime Minister, "That's good, I like it." Now, that China deal had become something of an irritant in the larger discussion about Trump's tariffs on Canada and his desire to see auto factories in Canada and Mexico move to the U.S., taking all those jobs with them. Now, the minister responsible for Canada-U.S. trade, that's Dominic LeBlanc, he was sent out to speak to reporters in France right after and said, hey, these hot mic comments are not a big deal. The Trump administration knew about the EV quotas when Carney announced them after meeting with Chinese President Xi Jinping in Beijing earlier this year. But there was no other formal meeting between Carney and Trump while they were in France. However, LeBlanc did talk with his U.S. counterpart in the CUSMA USMCA negotiations, that's Trade Ambassador Jameson Greer, and LeBlanc said they continue to make progress and will speak again next week as that CUSMA review deadline of July 1st approaches.
So maybe a little cause for optimism. Maybe a smidge. We'll see. Okay, now Glenn, there also seems to be growing emphasis on ending the war in Ukraine as...
All right. And before we continue, we will bring you a message from Chernova Health. Access Med, powered by Chernova Health, is a revolutionary telehealth service that offers fast, free online evaluations and free home delivery of customized compounded medications, offering custom weight loss support, ivermectin therapy, hair restoration, cosmetic rejuvenation, custom ED treatments, and more. You can complete your visit in less than 10 minutes, and there's no subscriptions or recurring fees ever. We've made getting started easier than ever. Simply follow the link, choose the product or treatment you're interested in, and then complete a quick online evaluation. Within days, your custom meds will arrive to your door. Mention Rumble in the coupon code and get 10% off your first treatment.
Carney refused to be snubbed at G7. And I want you to sit with that sentence for a second, because it tells you almost everything about how this man operates and almost nothing about what actually happened in those rooms in Evian-les-Bains over the last 3 days. Every other channel covering this story is going to call it a snub. They are going to show you the headline that Mark Carney left the G7 summit without a formal one-on-one meeting with Donald Trump. They are going to tell you Canada got iced out, and they are going to leave it there because outrage is easy and it gets clicks. I am not going to leave it there because the real story is stranger, more interesting, and frankly more impressive than a simple snub narrative. And by the end of this video, you are going to understand exactly why Carney cornered Trump 8 times while the cameras were pointed somewhere else, why that matters more than any staged photo opportunity ever could, and what it tells us about where this entire Canada-US relationship is heading right as the most important trade deadline in a generation bears down on both countries. If you have been with me through the hot mic moment, through the tariff fights, through the 51st state comments, you already know this. Rivalry is the most consequential political relationship in the world right now. And what happened this week in the French Alps might be the clearest window yet into how Mark Carney actually plans to win it. Stick with me, because I'm going to walk you through every layer of this, and if you find this kind of analysis valuable, this is exactly the channel that breaks these moments down properly. So go ahead and subscribe before we get into it, because there is a lot more of this coming. Let me set the stage properly, because location matters here more than people realize. This was not Kananaskis. This was not the Canadian Rockies where Carney hosted the world last year on his own turf, with his own security, his own schedule, his own home field advantage. This year, the G7 moved to Evian-les-Bains, a small lakeside town on the French side of Lake Geneva, chosen by Emmanuel Macron as host, and that detail alone changes the entire chessboard. When you host, you control the guest list, you control the bilateral schedule, you control who gets a formal sit-down with the President of the United States and who does not. And this year, Macron handed out exactly 2 formal bilateral meetings with Donald Trump. One went to himself, the host. The other went to Narendra Modi of India. Mark Carney, the leader of the country that shares the longest undefended border in the world with the United States, the country that for decades automatically got a one-on-one with whoever sat in the Oval Office, did not make that short list. That is a fact. That is what every other channel is going to scream about. And on the surface, yes, it looks bad. It looks like a snub. It looks like exactly the kind of public humiliation that would normally send a prime minister's office into full damage control mode, scrambling to explain, scrambling to spin, scrambling to save face in front of the cameras. Except that is not what happened. And this is where the story gets interesting, because instead of panicking, instead of demanding equal treatment, instead of having his staff leak anonymous quotes about being disrespected, Carney did something almost nobody expected. He shrugged. He stood in front of reporters and said, in essence, that he would not read too much into it. And then he dropped a number that should have stopped everyone in that press room cold. 7 or 8 separate conversations with President Trump over the previous 36 hours. Not one formal meeting, 8 informal ones. Economy, bilateral relations, the president's 80th birthday, artificial intelligence, Ukraine, Iran, a wide range of subjects by his own count spread across a day and a half of a summit where, officially, on paper, in the program handed out to journalists, he was not even supposed to be in the same room as Trump in any structured way. Think about what that actually means. While the headline writers were preparing their snub stories, Carney was working the room like he had nothing to prove and everything to gain, catching Trump between sessions, at meals, in hallways, anywhere he could get 5 minutes, and doing it 8 separate times. That is not the behavior of a man who got frozen out. That is the behavior of a man who decided the formal seating chart was irrelevant the moment he realized he did not need it. And here's where I want you to feel the weight of this, because if you are like most of my audience, you remember a time when diplomacy looked different, when a snub like this would have been a genuine crisis, when an American president refusing a sit-down with a Canadian prime minister would have dominated front pages for a week and triggered emergency calls between foreign ministries. We grew up watching leaders who needed the formal photo, who needed the handshake at the right table, who needed the world to see the meeting happen exactly the way protocol demanded, because that photo was the proof that the relationship was healthy. Carney just demonstrated in front of the entire G7 press corps that he does not need that proof anymore. He does not need the staged staged handshake. He needs results, and he appears willing to chase those results through side doors, hallway conversations, and stolen minutes between official sessions. Because at the end of the day, a 15-minute hallway conversation that actually moves a needle is worth infinitely more than a 30-minute photo op that produces nothing but a nice picture for the newspapers. That is a generational shift in how this job gets done, and I think it is worth sitting with, because it tells you something about the man Canadians elected to deal with exactly this kind of pressure. Before I move into the trade angle, I want to widen the lens for a second, because the snub story is only one piece of what Carney was actually doing in Evian-les-Bains, and the rest of his schedule tells you just as much about how he is running this government. While the Trump story was dominating headlines, Carney sat down with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky and announced a fresh round of sanctions targeting 162 individuals, entities, and vessels tied to Russia's war effort, on top of ongoing conversations about purchasing military jets from Italy to modernize Canada's own defense posture. That was one of at least 5 separate bilateral meetings Carney had scheduled in a single day at this summit. 5 formal meetings with other world leaders, 0 formal meetings with the one leader everyone wanted to talk about. Sit with that contrast for a moment, because it reframes the entire snub narrative. Carney was not sitting in a hotel room waiting for an invitation that never came. He was running a packed, consequential schedule on every other front: Ukraine sanctions, defense procurement, and squeezing Trump into the gaps between those meetings instead of building his entire trip around securing one photo opportunity. Now let's talk about why this moment matters so much more than a typical diplomatic snub story. Because the timing here is not an accident. And if you do not understand the timing, you do not understand the stakes. Right now, as we speak, Canada and the United States are heading toward July 1st, which is not the expiration date of their trade agreement, but it is the opening of the renewal window for the deal that has bound these two economies together since the early 1990s. Roughly 75% of everything Canada exports leaves the country bound for the United States. 3/4. Read that number again. There is no other relationship in Canada's economic life that even comes close to that level of dependency. And Donald Trump has spent the last several weeks publicly musing that he might not renew the deal at all. That the United States, in his words, does not need anything that Canada has. That is the backdrop against which this entire summit unfolded. This was never a casual diplomatic gathering for Carney. Every minute of this trip was a negotiation, whether it looked like one or not. And that is exactly why 8 informal conversations matter more than one formal photo opportunity ever could. Picture the actual dynamic for a second, because I think this is where the emotional core of the story really lives. You have Carney, a former central banker, a man who spent his career inside boardrooms reading balance sheets and managing crises quietly, now standing in a French resort town trying to protect the economic lifeline of an entire country, knowing that the man holding the leverage on the other side of the table treats relationships less like alliances and more like deals to be won or lost. Carney cannot afford pride here. He cannot afford to demand a formal meeting and risk being told no a second time, in public, on camera, with the whole world watching. So instead, he does the smarter thing. He takes whatever access he can get, in whatever form it comes, and he uses it. Trade Ministers Dominic LeBlanc and Chief Negotiator Janice Charette were doing their own version of this on the sidelines, meeting directly with U.S. Trade Representative Jamieson Greer while their boss worked the informal channel with Trump himself. That is not a man getting outmaneuvered. That is a government running a coordinated campaign on every available track at once, formal and informal, ministerial and presidential, all pointed at the same deadline. And I want to bring you back to something that happened just one day before this snub story broke, because it is the clearest evidence yet of exactly how Carney operates when the cameras are not where he wants them. During a working lunch on Middle East stability, a hot microphone caught Carney leaning over to Trump and quietly laying out the details of Canada's new arrangement, allowing a small, limited number of Chinese electric vehicles into the Canadian market at a reduced tariff rate, a deal that partially rolled back Canada's full tariff on Chinese EVs in exchange for China dropping its retaliatory tariffs on Canadian farm products. Less than 3% of the market, 49,000 cars, he was overheard saying, almost certainly trying to get ahead of an issue before the Americans, who maintain their own steep tariff wall against Chinese vehicles, could turn it into a bigger fight. That moment happened in plain sight, by accident, because a microphone in the room was live. But it tells you everything about the pattern. Carney is not waiting for scheduled meetings to do the actual work of running this relationship. He is finding Trump wherever Trump happens to be, at a lunch table, in a hallway, between sessions, and doing the job there. The formal meeting was never the mechanism he was relying on in the first place. This is also where I think the deeper psychological story sits. The part that I suspect resonates the most with people who have spent decades watching how power actually moves in rooms like this. There is a very old, very human instinct to read a snub as humiliation, to assume that if you are not given the seat at the head of the table, you have lost. But anyone who has spent real time in negotiations, in business, in any high-stakes environment, knows that the people who actually win are rarely the ones obsessing over where they are seated. They are the ones who figure out how to get what they need regardless of the seating chart. Carney spent his career first running the Bank of Canada through the aftermath of the 2008 financial crisis, then running the Bank of England through Brexit, sitting across from people who held more formal power than he did, and finding ways to extract outcomes anyway. This is not new behavior from him. This is the exact same instinct, just transplanted from a central bank boardroom to a G7 summit in the French Alps. It also helps to remember what happened the last time these two men shared a G7 stage, because the contrast tells you something important. Back at Kananaskis, on Canadian soil, Carney and Trump did get their formal sit-down, 30 minutes one-on-one, cameras rolling, pleasantries exchanged, and they walked out of that meeting promising a new trade deal within 30 days. That deadline came and went without the sweeping deal either side promised. The formal meeting, the handshake, the cameras, all of it produced a headline and a deadline that quietly evaporated. Now compare that to this week, no formal meeting at all, and instead a string of unscripted conversations that, by Carney's own account, covered more ground in 36 hours than that 30-minute Kananaskis sit-down ever did. If the polished version produced a broken promise and the unpolished version produced 8 substantive conversations, you start to understand why Carney might genuinely not be losing sleep over which version he got this time. Now I am not going to sit here and tell you this is a clean total victory, because that would not be honest analysis, and I owe you honest analysis, not cheerleading. The optics genuinely matter in international politics, and there is a real cost to the world watching the President of the United States hand formal meetings to France and India while leaving Canada off that list. Other countries notice these things. Markets notice these things. If you are a Canadian exporter wondering whether your biggest customer is about to walk away from the agreement that protects your business, watching your prime minister get publicly bypassed for a formal sit-down is not exactly a comforting headline, regardless of how many informal conversations happen behind it. Carney himself seemed to sense this risk, because he went out of his way to downplay any notion of a 6-against-1 dynamic at this summit, acknowledging that there will be issues where Canada's position is more extreme relative to other G7 members. A careful, almost surgical bit of humility, designed to avoid looking like he is picking a fight he cannot win. That is not weakness. That is the same instinct again, just applied to managing perception instead of managing access. Let's also talk about why Carney has so much riding on getting this tone exactly right, because this is not happening in a vacuum. Just months ago, in January, Carney stood on a stage in Davos, Switzerland, and delivered a speech that instantly turned him into a symbol for what people started calling middle power resistance. He declared the old rules-based global order effectively over, and condemned the coercion of smaller countries by great powers, language that was widely read as a direct shot at the kind of pressure Trump has been applying to Canada through tariffs and through that grating, repeated suggestion that Canada should simply become the 51st state. That speech is part of why Carney won the Prime Minister's job in the first place, riding a wave of public anger at exactly that kind of treatment. But here is the tension, and it is a real one. The same political historian voices who praised that Davos speech are now openly pointing out the contradiction in Carney's current approach, noting there is a clear gap between the defiant middle power language from January and the much more careful, almost conciliatory posture he is taking now, quietly trying to nudge the Trump administration in the right direction on trade rather than confronting it head on. Both things are true at once. Carney is the man who stood up to hegemonic coercion on a world stage, and Carney is also the man whose country sends 3/4 of its exports to the very government he criticized. That tension does not resolve itself. It just gets managed, week by week, summit by summit, hallway conversation by hallway conversation. So here's my read on what this snub story actually represents, once you strip away the outrage headlines. This was not Trump punishing Carney. This was Macron, as host, making a calculated choice about who gets formal FaceTime with an American president, who increasingly treats every meeting like a transaction, and choosing to spend that limited resource on France itself and on India, a country Trump has been actively courting for trade and strategic reasons all year. Canada simply was not the priority allocation this time. And Carney, reading the room correctly, decided not to turn that allocation decision into a public fight he could not win. Instead, he ran his own parallel track, 8 conversations deep, covering everything from the economy to Ukraine to Iran to Trump's own birthday, proving in real time that access does not require a seating chart when you are willing to work for it in every spare minute available. Now let's talk about where this goes next, because that is ultimately what you are here for. The analysis that helps you see around the corner instead of just reacting to yesterday's headline. The July 1st USMCA renewal window is the real deadline that matters, and everything that happened at this summit, the informal conversations, the trade minister meetings on the sidelines, the careful tone management, all of it was preparation for that fight. I expect the next several weeks to bring a wave of statements from both sides designed to shape public expectations before formal negotiations intensify. Trump continuing to publicly question whether the deal needs renewing at all as a pressure tactic, and Carney's government continuing to work every available informal channel rather than escalating publicly, because escalation only works when you believe you hold the stronger hand. And right now, with 3/4 of Canadian exports on the line, Carney clearly does not believe that, and he is not pretending otherwise. Watch for Dominic LeBlanc and Janice Charette to become much more visible names in the coming weeks as the actual technical negotiations accelerate, because the presidential level theater, the snubs and the hot mic moments and the photo opportunities, those generate headlines, but the technical teams are where the actual deal gets written. I also expect Carney to keep leaning on this same playbook of quiet, persistent access over public confrontation, because it fits both his temperament and his political incentives. He cannot be seen at home as weak in front of Trump, not after the wave of public anger that put him in office, but he also cannot afford an open trade war that devastates Canadian exporters. So the strategy becomes exactly what we just watched in Evian Laban's Project Calm in public. Downplay any appearance of conflict, and then work every informal angle available to extract real concessions where it counts. On tariffs, on the EV arrangement with China, on the long-term shape of the USMCA renewal. If that pattern holds, do not be surprised if the actual breakthrough moments in this relationship keep happening exactly the way the EV conversation did. Caught on a hot microphone, overheard in a hallway, leaked from a side conversation, rather than announced at a podium with 2 flags and a handshake. There is also a wider signal here about how the...
All right. So then the internet did what the internet always does. It turned a diplomatic summit into a high school cafeteria analysis. Who stood where, who looked annoyed, who looked confident, who got snubbed, who was running the room. Here's a little compilation.
Hello, I'm the boss. How are you?
I would too. Shit, if I was the American president, I'd say that shit.
Would you like to stay for the meeting? It's okay with me. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Then here's the Italian Prime Minister talking very directly to Trump, apparently. And here she is again.
Last night I dreamt of San Pedro.
Giving Trump a clear nonverbal communication of ahem, ahem. She reminds me of Madonna. She looks a lot like Madonna. But all in all, politics theater, and world leaders know it. Every handshake, every photo, every seat assignment, every awkward glance. These things aren't accidents. The public thinks diplomacy happens in speeches. The people who study power know it often happens in the symbolism. What made these viral moments interesting wasn't the handshake, it wasn't the photo, it wasn't her reaction. Millions of people looked at those images and immediately came to the same conclusion. Trump looked like a boss through all of those compilations. Whether you love him or hate him, that's the perception. And perception is one of the most powerful currencies in politics. Nobody was talking about policy details afterward. They were talking about who appeared to be leading the room. That's influence. That's branding. And that's the power of projection. In many ways, modern politics has become part government, part reality television. And at this G7 summit, the cameras may have told a bigger story than the official press releases. But let's get into the bigger picture. This week's stories all connect to the same theme, and that's control. Border control, military control, economic control, narrative control. I'm muted.
This is actually from November 2011, when the United Nations held a big vote about Palestine, and we'll get to what that was in a second. These are the countries that backed Israel in voting no, and these countries abstained, which was basically the same thing. What you were looking at here is the pro-Israel world as of 2011, mostly Western countries and small nations that depend on them. These are the governments that arm Israel's military, that support it diplomatically, that shield it from international pressure. And to understand how far that support went, it helps to look at what that 2011 UN vote, the map, was actually for. This is a UN agency called UNESCO. That name stands for Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization, and they do like events and educational grants. It's all very benign and boring. The Palestinian government asked to join it, and from the UN's perspective, yeah, no big deal. The UN resolution that established Israel back in 1947 also called for an independent Arab state in Palestine. So, according to the UN, Palestine is a state just as much as Israel. It should be allowed to join this nice cultural agency. But Israel opposed this because they did not want anything that legitimized the idea of Palestine as a state. And these 65 countries sided with Israel. That's how far they went for them. But that was 2011. Check out what one of those blue countries is up to today. This is Italy's Prime Minister, Giorgia Meloni.
Italy has criticized Israeli attacks peacekeepers there.
In light of the current situation, the government has decided to suspend the automatic renewal of the defense agreement with Israel.
This is a huge pivot, and this kind of thing has been happening a lot. Israel's backers, that network of countries that have been supporting it for decades, they've been kind of turning on it, one by one, often in small ways, but it is adding up. And today, we're going to look at what all of that is adding up to. We're going to ask what this means for Israel and what happens when the international support it's long counted on to do everything that it does starts to look like it could really go away. So I'm going to give away the ending slightly here and tell you that Israel has actually been quietly preparing for years now a plan for what to do if and when it loses the international support it relies on. We'll also look at why this is happening now and what it means that it is. But we'll begin by simply going through country by country on the map what is changing here. Starting early 2024, the height of Israel's war in Gaza.
Look at that shit. That is ridiculous.
Experts were calling it a genocide. The International Criminal Court was preparing charges for war crimes. And that April, the UN did what it does. It held a symbolic, non-binding vote. This one, on admission of new members, that said, in theory, Palestine was qualified for membership. In other words, to be recognized as a state. The US had vetoed that, though. So all this actually changed was where the powerless Palestinian representative was seated in the UN assembly room. Still, this was a chance for countries to take a side. And a lot of them that had long sided with Israel used this vote to signal that that was kind of over. Look at that map again. We're going to label all of the countries that went from voting with Israel back in 2011 to voting against it in 2024. Australia and New Zealand, important Western countries. Japan and South Korea, major economies, usually vote with the West. A bunch of countries in Africa and the Caribbean that rely on Western support. A few other big ones. But also, and this was a big deal, a bunch of Europe. Denmark, Poland, Portugal, Estonia, plus a couple more. So look, Denmark and Poland, not exactly the biggest world powers, but Europe collectively is Israel's biggest trading partner. It's their biggest source of tourists. It's their second biggest supplier of weapons after the United States. Europe is what expands the pro-Israel sphere from a niche American thing into a broad Western coalition. So any chip in that, it's a big deal. And then 2026, the Iran war hits.
The U.S. and Israel have launched strikes and a major military operation targeting Iran. The Ayatollah, the supreme leader of Iran, is dead. For the first time in history, Iranian officials say the country has closed the Strait of Hormuz following joint strikes from the U.S. and Israel.
Which didn't just offend sensibilities and values in Europe, it really messed up their economies.
The country is facing widespread disruption as fuel protests continue, with major roads blocked and shortages beginning to emerge.
So pretty soon you got stuff like this.
Il est évident qu'il nous faut pouvoir hausser le ton dans les sanctions.
This is Belgium's foreign minister.
Suspension à tout le moins partielle de l'accord d'association entre Israël et l'Union européenne.
He is talking about trade sanctions on Israel, the kind of thing you do to a hostile rogue state. He even went on to say that Belgium would support a total EU boycott. Here, let's zoom in on Europe, because it's not just Belgium. Spain, Ireland, and Slovenia are also calling for the EU to sanction Israel. Ukraine threatened sanctions too, over Israel importing grain from its Russian-occupied territory. Israel stopped the stolen grain import, but the threat is still hanging. Also remember, we saw that Italy suspended a defense cooperation deal. But the really big turn has been France. France recently closed its airspace to Israeli flights carrying weapon shipments. It's a symbolic step, sure, but a big enough warning shot that Israel, in response, halted all arms purchases from France. This is a real loss for Israel. French French weapons make up a ton of Israel's imports. Like, check this out. You can see it here. This is the EU data for every European arms sale. And if you look at the top arms sales to Israel, a ton of them are from France. Like, all the biggest ones. You almost wonder if Israel did this to preempt France from doing it first. You know, you can't break up with me, I break up with you. Anyway, the point is, this is effectively a quasi-self-imposed French arms embargo on Israel, which joins a Spanish arms embargo imposed a few months earlier. So yeah, this is Europe on Israel today. You can see it's a pretty meaningful pivot. But now we got to talk about the US.
The time is now for us to end all U.S. military aid to the extremist Netanyahu government.
This is Senator Bernie Sanders recently introducing a resolution that would block all U.S. arms sales to Israel. It did not pass, but it was closer than you might guess, 40 to 59.
On this vote, the yeas are 40, the nays 59. The motion is not agreed to.
And like the UN votes or the EU threats, this was about sending a signal. 40 U.S. senators voted for an arms embargo. That is a message that almost half of the American political system is ready to really turn on Israel. And that's not just a signal to Israel, which, let's face it, seems unlikely to change behavior. It's a signal to all of these other countries that global pro-Israel coalition is getting closer and closer to breaking apart. So it's time to ask why. Why now? The simplest explanation would be that this is all in reaction to Gaza and to the Iran war. But I think the truth is that those things are just catalysts, pushing along a change that's been building for a long time now. This is a foreign policy article warning Israel that it lost Europe. But what's interesting about this is that it's from 2012. One of the things they were reacting to was that 2011 UN vote we looked at before. What looks to us now like it had been a big pro-Israel wave in Europe, at the time it looked like Europe turning on Israel. And this makes more sense if we rewind a few years more to 2008. This is German leader Angela Merkel speaking to Israel's parliament. And she said basically, we will support you forever because of the Holocaust.
Das heißt, die Sicherheit Israels ist für mich als deutsche Bundeskanzlerin niemals verhandelbar.
But look, it's not just Holocaust guilt behind this. There's a bunch of other stuff, like this sense among democracies worldwide that Israel was a like-minded democracy surrounded by hostile dictatorships, and a sense after September 11 that Israel and the West were on the same side in a global war on terror. Plus, there was some Cold War stuff in there before that. And look, my point is that there's a lot going on in European support for Israel, but it's all anchored to stuff that happened in the past. 1945. Arab-Israeli wars in 67, 73.
Invasion of the Golan Heights by Syria and Egypt.
2001, which means the further that those events drift into memory, the less kind of cultural and political scaffolding there is for that relationship to exist, especially as Israel does more and more stuff in the present that upsets or hurts or offends its international sponsors, which is why support for Israel is strongest among older people whose view of it is rooted in that past. Like, here, look at this. This is Chuck Schumer, the Senate Democratic leader, speaking to AIPAC in 2018.
Of course, we say it's our land. The Torah says it, but they don't believe in the Torah. So that's the reason there is not peace. They invent other reasons, but they do not believe in a Jewish state. And that is why we in America must stand strong with Israel through thick and thin.
Schumer's obviously come to this through a kind of Jewish ethno-nationalism. That's why he specifically supports Israel. But he's drawing on, and for a long time got that support because of, a wider sense across Western countries that Israel is quote-unquote like us. But that feeling, that perception, has been steadily eroding, often slowly, but steadily, for as long as I have been writing and reporting on Israel and Palestine. Every year, people learn more about Israel's occupation, the settlements, the treatment of Israeli Arabs. And it gets harder and harder to recognize the Israel that we see with our eyes to the Israel that we had been told was this foothold of Western democratic values. And big moments like Gaza or Iran tend to generate a lot of intention that accelerates that shift. This is a recent NBC poll of Americans by age. The green bars measure positive views on Israel, and the yellow bars are negative views. When NBC first ran this back in 2023, older Americans had overwhelmingly positive views of Israel, people my age were more mixed, and younger people were a bit more negative than positive. Fast forward to today, young Americans have turned on Israel 5-1.
Yep.
My generation, it's 2-1 negative on Israel. Older adults are almost split, and only the oldest are like solidly pro-Israel. That's how you get 40 US senators voting for an arms embargo on a country that not that long ago they'd have all felt obligated to pledge their undying support to. Public opinion has shifted really quickly. That is part of why you see this. World governments that had always supported Israel suddenly starting to pivot. But there are some big holdouts, especially Germany, the UK, and the US. Things are changing within each of those countries, like we talked about in the US, but their leaders are resisting pressure to break with Israel. I know it might feel difficult to imagine a real, meaningful Western break with Israel, but relative to just 10 or 15 years ago, which is not that long in geopolitical terms, it is already sort of happening in ways that recently would have felt impossible. Hey guys, just wanted to quickly pause to say, if you want to learn more about Israel, why it is the way it is, what it's doing, its place in the world, all of that, head to newpress.com/questions for an exclusive video. It's part of a series I'm doing called No Dumb Questions, where I answer big questions about the world, or the QR code. Okay, back to the video. And Israeli leaders know this, which is why they have a whole plan to prepare for the day that the West breaks with them for real. I actually did a bunch of reporting on this plan a few years ago, and what I found is that Israel had quietly achieved a real degree of autonomy from the US. This had a few components. It made peace with a bunch of the countries it used to need American protection from, like Egypt and Saudi Arabia. It learned how to build big weapon systems domestically. So while, yeah, it's happy to take American and European exports, it can replace a lot of them if needed. Israeli voters have also embraced more hardline nationalism. So they no longer really pressure their leaders to keep foreign powers happy the way they used to. And in some ways, they even want their leaders to defy those foreign powers by doing things like expanding settlements. And look, yes, it is still true that Israel has a ton to gain from American and European weapons, funding, and support. Those play a big role in empowering Israel's war. My point is that Israel has built up its autonomy so that holding onto that support is no longer existential for them, which frees them up to defy those countries, even the United States. which is how you get moments like Trump last year tweeting at Israel to not bomb Iran, which of course they still did. Or this year, Trump tweeting at Israel that it was prohibited for bombing Lebanon, which, you guessed it, they immediately did anyway. But I mentioned at the start of this video that Israel's plan to survive a breakup with the West is only sort of working. One component in particular. I wrote about it back in that article. And it's that Israel has been cultivating new allies, right-wing, illiberal democracies that actually admire the very actions that have been pushing away its more traditional allies. An Israeli analyst named Dagya Scheimlin, who told me about this, called it, kind of mockingly, the other friends policy. Let me show you on that map. The big ones are India, Brazil, and Hungary, plus a couple others. Countries whose leaders aren't drawn to Israel because of the past, but because of what it is today, as a symbol of unapologetic militarism and ethno-nationalism. And this worked pretty well for a while. Hungary especially was Israel's best friend in the EU, vetoing all sorts of trade restrictions or sanctions that Europe might have otherwise imposed. But after a couple years, it kind of started to fall apart. Israel's buddy in Brazil lost re-election and got sentenced to jail time for a failed coup attempt. And its ally in Hungary lost power too, actually just a few weeks into the Iran war. And the new guy in power there has already said his government would arrest Netanyahu on war crimes charges if he visited Hungary. Better look at that map again. Brazil out, Hungary out. That Israeli diplomatic resurgence is looking pretty short-lived. So what does all this mean? Look, when I started reporting on Israel and its place in the world back in 2010 or 2011, it was honestly unthinkable to me that the Western pro-Israel world would ever cool to it to the extent that it already has. And I know that to a lot of you, especially if you're on the younger side, that probably sounds crazy. Because if you look around you, it looks like the West supports Israel as unreservedly as it ever has. You know, the US just started an entire open-ended global economy destroying war with Iran, basically as a favor to Israel. Western weapons are funding Israel's wars in Gaza and Lebanon. I'm not blind. I see all this. But I am telling you, if you take a step back, if you look at the bigger picture, the kind of longer timeline here, that support is starting to look kind of tenuous. We are not talking about a wide and deep pro-Israel consensus across the Western world anymore. We are talking about a handful of countries that are increasingly isolated in backing Israel, led by leaders who are acting in defiance of their publics, their political parties, even their own core supporters. I'm sure you've heard that Hemingway quote, change happens slowly and then all at once. We are in the happen slowly part right now, but it feels like that all at once is coming up fast. We might look back 5-10 years from now and feel that actually it was as of this moment that it was already here.
Every major story this week comes down to basically who gets to make the decisions. A nation that can't control its borders loses sovereignty, period.
There's a famous story about the first time Benjamin Netanyahu met Bill Clinton. The year was 1996, and Netanyahu was just elected Israeli prime minister. Upon arriving at the White House, Netanyahu sits down with President Clinton and begins lecturing him on the Middle East, on Palestine, and the future of Israel. When Netanyahu was finished, he stood up and exited the room before President Clinton had a chance to say a single word. This prompted the president to turn to his advisors with a puzzled face and famously say, who the does he think he is? Who's the superpower here? The story is important for context because here we are, 28 years later, and Benjamin Netanyahu is still bossing around and lecturing U.S. presidents on how the Middle East should function. In reality, the Israeli lobby holds tremendous power over the president of the United States and the U.S. Congress. In fact, Joe Biden needs to be extremely careful because the way his relationship with Netanyahu is going, it could change everything.
This was 2 years
leading
ago.
to a Donald Trump victory this November. Israel is prosecuting a war that is literally starving the entire population of Gaza to death, and that's not an exaggeration. Just listen to Secretary of State Antony Blinken, who said these exact words last week. According to the most respected measure of these things, 100% of the population in Gaza is at severe levels of acute food insecurity. That's the first time an entire population has been so classified. We also see again, according to, in this case, the United Nations, 100%, the totality of the population is in need of humanitarian assistance. Take a moment to digest the quote you just heard, because I had to reread this several times and was in absolute shock over Blinken's comments. The carnage we've seen unfold in Gaza has resulted, for the first time in history, an entire population to be classified as starving and in need of humanitarian assistance. Literally, every single person in Gaza. If the United States truly believed in human rights and international law, it would step in and force Israel into an immediate ceasefire. But no surprise here, the U.S. government did the exact opposite, and this mass starvation in Gaza is being carried out with the United States' deep participation. First, the U.S. government is supplying Israel with the weaponry it needs to fight this war. Remember, none of the carnage you see in Gaza would be possible without U.S. weapons. Second, the U.S. is protecting Israel at the United Nations and other international forums from the consequences of its actions. But it actually gets much worse. 4 days after Blinken delivered this spine-chilling speech on the truth of Gaza, the U.S. government passed a new funding deal that includes a ban on U.S. aid to the largest relief agency in Gaza until 2025. Maybe you've never heard of the UNRWA, but it stands for the United Nations Relief and Works Agency. It was created in 1949 to help the millions of Palestinian refugees displaced by the creation of Israel. The agency received $1.17 billion in pledges in 2022, and as you can see, the United States was the largest donor, accounting for nearly 30% of that total. This UN agency was created as a temporary solution for the Palestinian refugee crisis, but here we are 75 years later, and millions of Gazans still depend on it for food, shelter, and education. Without U.S. humanitarian aid, even more people in Gaza will starve to death. This action by the U.S. government is deplorable, but it gets even worse. In the same bill, the United States is pledging an additional $3.8 billion to Israel to continue its war efforts in Gaza. I honestly just can't comprehend the actions of my government. The U.S. Secretary of State admits to the world that every single person in Gaza is now catastrophically starving, so we respond by cutting off humanitarian aid to the largest agency dedicated to helping the people in Gaza while simultaneously also sending another $4 billion to Israel. I mean, can the U.S. government do anything worse? Actually, it can. There's one final point in the bill that truly shows how much control Netanyahu has over the U.S. Congress. This new bill specifies, the U.S. would also cut aid to the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank if the Palestinians initiate an International Criminal Court, ICC, judicially authorized investigation or actively support such an investigation that subjects Israeli nationals to investigation for alleged crimes against Palestinians. As a U.S. citizen, I have a confession, and I need to be completely honest with you. I've never been more ashamed of the actions of my government than watching them handle this situation in Gaza with complete and utter failure. There are simply no other words to describe it other than a total absence of humanity. But U.S. citizens are beginning to fight back and are starting to show their frustration against our government. In reality, Biden's unwavering support for Netanyahu and Israel could actually cost him the upcoming election. Recently, voters in Michigan protested Biden's stance by voting uncommitted. This was widely covered in the media. In fact,
the left and right media will never want you to see that 36% of Republican voters disagree with this war. This is the thing that could be joining Americans and stop all the infighting, but they won't report on that because they don't want you realizing that both sides actually agree on something. A good portion of both sides actually agree on something.
I can see over 300 articles were published on this very story. I'm looking at this on Ground News, a platform I use to analyze the latest world events. I use it every day in my work as a geopolitical commentator, and I'm not just saying that because they're sponsoring today's video. Check them out at ground.news/Cyrus. The link is in the description, including sources out of Russia and delegate count. Left-wing media couldn't rebuke this fact and instead admitted that discontent over Biden's foreign policy is influencing Arab American voters and progressives. Even more interesting is seeing how this story received worldwide coverage, including sources out of Russia and all over the Middle East. And you can see this information on all the biggest trending events around the world. Ground News has consolidated over 18,000 stories on the Israel-Palestine conflict in the past 3 months, including many sources from Israeli and Arab news outlets, meaning you can gain perspectives from every political viewpoint to truly understand the situation. I also use Ground News to follow other trending stories, like the potential TikTok ban, and you know I'll be using this as a resource for the upcoming 2024 US election. Everyone, as a content creator, you know I only endorse products I've personally used, and I 100% believe that Ground News is an essential tool you need to understand this complex world we live in. Simply go to ground.news/sky. Literally, this was the grand plan from the Biden administration, and this cartoon illustrates. Let's bring you up to speed on what the US government has been doing. At first, the US thought they figured out a brilliant workaround. They could continue supplying Israel the weapons it needs to administer this carnage in Gaza and try to offset this by dropping humanitarian aid from the sky. Literally, this was the grand plan from the Biden administration, and this cartoon illustrates exactly what this looks like in real life. We'll make sure to send some food along with the bombs destroying your home. But according to humanitarian experts, it's very expensive and inefficient to deliver aid from the air. The reality is, whatever aid can be delivered by air is a drop in the bucket and comes nowhere close to supplying the millions of Gazans who are starving to death and in desperate need of medical supplies. What's worse, several of the parachutes malfunctioned, striking and killing 5 people in the process. Next, the US is sending a ship to the coast of Gaza to build a pier so boats can dock and bring humanitarian aid to the suffering people in Gaza. Wow. Can you imagine how long it's going to take US military personnel to construct a pier in the ocean from scratch? Of course, the easiest option would be for the Biden administration to give pressure to Israel and force them to open up the land border crossing. But it's become abundantly clear by now, the US has very little leverage over Israel. Once again, it is with US weapons and the tax dollars of hardworking US citizens like myself that is prosecuting this war. And it absolutely outrages me that our president, and frankly, everybody in Congress, doesn't have the balls to stand up to Israel and tell them to do what is morally and ethically correct. Another massive problem for the United States is that they are now in direct violation of its own law by participating in this effort to starve the people of Gaza to death. Under the Foreign Assistance Act, it is illegal for the US government to provide weapons to foreign countries who will use those weapons to commit grave human rights violations. It's also against the Foreign Assistance Act for the US government to provide weapons to countries who are blocking the passage of US humanitarian assistance. Wow. Grave human rights abuses? Check. Blocking US humanitarian assistance? Check. Israel is 2 for 2, as the US continues to violate its own laws, which were put in place after previously US military failures like the war in Iraq and Afghanistan killed millions of lives. Honestly, this is why countries like Russia and China have zero respect for US government officials who lecture the world on human rights, the rule of law, and how Western democracy is the most superior form of government. When our politicians say one thing and then literally turn around and do the exact opposite, it's a complete loss of any credibility. Yet, that is the foreign policy of the United States, and once again why the US is embarking on a very dangerous path for its future. By giving unconditional support to Israel, the US is continuing to isolate itself and Israel on the international stage, and this most certainly is not in the best interest of both countries. But the biggest issue here is by unconditionally supporting Israel, the United States is wiping out any remaining credibility we have left on the global stage. And I say that because we've already lost a tremendous amount of credibility, and it always involves military failures. When we pulled out of Vietnam, we lost credibility. When President Obama said that the use of chemical weapons in Syria was a red line, but then didn't go to war, we lost credibility. When the US spent $2 trillion over 20 years fighting in Afghanistan, only to replace the Taliban with the Taliban, America lost credibility. And this blind support of Israel makes America look completely impotent, since we are not using the tools at our disposal for ending this war. I mean, how simple would it be for Biden to tell Netanyahu, you will not use any more American weapons in this war, and we will not protect you from the consequences of your actions in the UN, International Court of Justice, or any international forum. Doing so would not be anti-Semitic. It's called being a rational person with morals, and it's also how international law works. The US wants to put Vladimir Putin on trial for war crimes against the people of Ukraine. But how could they possibly pursue this when the US is not only supporting their friend Netanyahu to commit war crimes, but also giving him the weapons to do so? But thankfully, there is some hope. Last week, Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, who by the way is the highest ranking Jewish official in the United States, stated Netanyahu has lost his way, and Israel should hold new elections as Netanyahu is an obstacle for peace in the Middle East. As you can imagine, these comments went viral, and no doubt were an effort by Schumer to appease the younger voters in America who are tired of watching this brutal war unfold in Gaza. Remember what I said at the beginning of this video? If the Democrats don't make a drastic change in their approach to Israel, it could very well cost them the election and hand power right over to Donald Trump this November. But it goes beyond just the Democrats winning the important 2024 election. Schumer confessed he spent 2 months writing and polishing the words of the speech and thought meticulously over how to deliver these important words. Of course, it comes as no surprise that Netanyahu immediately condemned Schumer's words and fought back against the United States. But ultimately, Schumer revealed why he decided to criticize Netanyahu, and that is because he wanted to save the future of Israel. But now, it's also time to save the future of the United States. I don't believe Donald Trump is the change we need to see in America, but if Joe Biden won't take a stand and push back against Israel before it's too late, then it really won't matter who wins the presidency this November, because Netanyahu will march confidently back into the White House, and this time will be the one stating, do you want to know who the superpower is? Everyone, today was an important message. I've been covering Israel's war in Gaza from the moment
Thank you, Backwater, for the Rumble rant. He says, here's to Luna and the Thirst Trap News program. Without you, our nights would suck. Aw. Thank you for bringing all of us together. Thank you for everything you do to support America First. Much love. Thank you so much, Backwater, for your support.
When it broke out. And as always, I look forward to bringing you the latest in geopolitics. I honestly couldn't do my job without resources like Ground News, and I'm so thankful for their partnership. If you want to understand the bias in media today and be a better informed global citizen, simply go to ground.news/Cyrus, subscribe to my link for 40% off unlimited access, or try it for less than $1 this month. Everyone, as always, thank you for your incredible support, and I look forward to seeing you all in our next video soon.
All right. So who do you think is controlling America? A government that can't control its foreign policy loses independence, as we've seen and discussed. A media that can't question power becomes propaganda. And citizens who stop asking questions become subjects. The headlines, they may look disconnected at times, but they're all chapters in the same book. The battle over who gets to decide the future and whether ordinary people still have a seat at the table. Now, before we wrap up tonight's show, I want to talk about something bigger than borders, bigger than wars, bigger than political parties. I want to talk about the Matrix. No, not the movie. The real Matrix. Most people think the Matrix is some futuristic computer simulation. I think it's much simpler than that. The Matrix is a collection of narratives that tell you what to think before you've had a chance to think for yourself. It's deployed upon you the moment you learn to speak and the moment you go to kindergarten. It's the religion that's handed down to you by your parents. It's the American history that is determined. You know what happened in our past as determined by our overlords. It's the constant streams of headlines in the media, the algorithms, the outrage machine, the endless cycle of fear, distraction, and division. It's the system that keeps people arguing over symptoms while ignoring the causes. This week is a perfect example. One side's fighting over immigration, another side is fighting over foreign wars, another side is arguing over Trump, and another side is arguing over Israel. But very few people stop long enough to answer the bigger question: why are these stories happening right now? Who benefits? Who gains influence? Who gains money? Who gains power? Because when you start asking those questions, the stories stop looking separate. They start looking connected. The border isn't just about immigration. It's about labor, economics, and political power. The Middle East isn't just about religion. It's about energy, trade routes, military positioning, global influence, and religion. The G7 summit isn't just a photo op. It's a gathering of world leaders negotiating the future while cameras capture the theater, so you don't really know what was discussed. And that's the trick. The Matrix wants you staring at the actors. Breaking the Matrix means paying attention to the script. The Matrix wants you emotionally reacting. The Matrix means observing. The Matrix wants you choosing teams. Breaking the Matrix means following incentives. The Matrix wants you fighting your neighbors. Breaking the Matrix means identifying who profits from that fight. The Matrix wants you trapped in left versus right. But breaking the Matrix means recognizing that power often protects itself regardless of which party is in charge. It's the WWE. They're in a back room saying, this week I'll be the bad guy. Next week you be the bad guy. It's a uniparty. And here's the most important part. Breaking the Matrix doesn't mean believing every conspiracy theory. It doesn't mean assuming everything is fake. And it doesn't mean becoming cynical. It means being aware. It means learning how to identify patterns. It means asking questions. It means refusing to outsource your thinking. Because the moment you start seeing the connections between politics, media, money, war, culture, and power, the illusion starts to crack. And once the illusion cracks, you can never quite see the world the same way again.
Ever wonder why politicians say one thing and do another? It's not just corruption, it's a system, and billionaires have mastered it. From super PACs to dark money to lobbyists you've never heard of, America's wealthiest don't just influence policy, they buy it, quietly, legally. Today we follow the money to uncover how billionaires purchase political power without most people even noticing. In 2010, the Supreme Court Citizens United decision opened the floodgates for unlimited political spending. That ruling allowed corporations and individuals to pour money into politics, often anonymously. Since then, the rise of super PACs and 501c4 social welfare groups has created a shadow campaign system, one where money moves behind the scenes, without names, without limits, and often without accountability. And the biggest beneficiaries, billionaires. Let's look at a few case studies. The Koch network, not just two brothers, an entire ecosystem of think tanks, media, and lobbying arms influencing everything from tax laws to education policy. George Soros poured millions into local DA races and judicial elections to shift legal frameworks at the grassroots level. Peter Thiel backed candidates aligned with his ideology and funded outside groups shaping narratives around technology and national security. These billionaires don't always fund candidates directly. They fund the machinery that creates them. Polling firms, narrative builders, opposition researchers, and because it's routed through third-party groups, much of it stays hidden. According to political scientist Thomas Ferguson's investment theory of politics, elections are won not by votes, but by investment. Candidates are like startups. Billionaires invest in the ones most likely to protect or expand their interests. Former Senator Al Simpson put it bluntly, he who pays the piper calls the tune. And the result, policies that overwhelmingly benefit the 1%, from tax loopholes to deregulation to privatization of public services.
We may now think that everything is fine, but the fact is that the system is broke and it needs fixing.
What you're doing is asking some form of regulation to protect the world against you.
Well, I'm a player, and I think all players should be regulated. There have to be rules of the game.
In the last 2 years, you've been blamed for financial collapse of Thailand, Malaysia, Indonesia, Japan, and Russia.
All of the above.
All of the above. Yeah. Are you that powerful?
No, I think there's a great misunderstanding.
The Prime Minister of Malaysia said that the region spent 40 years trying to build up its economy, and along comes a moron like Soros with a lot of money, and it's all over. He called you a criminal.
It's easier for him to blame an outside force than to admit that they were mismanaging their economy and their currency. The French finance minister talked about hanging speculators from lampposts.
Let's follow a hypothetical money trail. A billionaire donates to a 501c4 nonprofit, no disclosure required. That nonprofit sends money to a super PAC. The super PAC funds attack ads or pushes favorable narratives, never officially coordinated with the candidate, but conveniently aligned. All of it is legal. None of it has to be transparent. The billionaire never shows up in the FCC filings, but their money shapes the outcome. It's not a bribe. It's an investment with a massive ROI. What's the cost of billionaire-funded politics? A tax code full of carve-outs, policies that weaken unions but boost hedge funds, erosion of public trust in democracy. The average voter gives $20 to a campaign. A billionaire gives $20 million to shape an entire election cycle. And when billionaires fund both sides, Republican and Democrat, they ensure the real issues affecting working-class Americans stay off the table. Here's the truth. Billionaires don't just influence politics, they engineer it. Through dark money, PACs, and think tanks. They shape laws that benefit themselves, and because it's legal, it's invisible to most people. This isn't just about one party or one person. It's about a system designed to serve money, not voters. If you found this eye-opening, hit the subscribe button, because every week we break down how money, power, and...
All right, here comes the next video.
The biggest fear of America's ruling class wasn't retaliation from the natives. Their greatest fear was class warfare. Bacon's Rebellion. In 1676, African slaves and European indentured servants did the unthinkable.
And European indentured servants did the unthinkable. Blacks, meaning Africans, and Europeans were both enslaved.
United and burned the British colony of Jamestown, Virginia, to the ground. They weren't fighting each other. They were fighting their one common enemy, rich British plantation owners. Hundreds of government buildings, mansions, and plantations were destroyed. This class warfare terrified the planter elites. They vowed never to let it happen again. Their solution? Create division among working class by racializing labor. They replaced indentured servitude with perpetual African enslavement. They gave the peasant European class a bribe, whiteness. They were given land. Africans were condemned to eternal bondage. It was whiteness that gave birth to the construct of race. Race is not biology. It's a social construct, a political strategy used to prevent class warfare. Race was
political strategy
manufactured
Created by the monarchy.
to protect the rich and powerful, divide the poor working class, and kill solidarity among them. And over 400 years later, it still works.
Still works.
This is not a war for U.S. interests. This is a war for Israel and for what Netanyahu believes Israel's interests are. And Israel, we've heard Pete Hegseth lay out a new rationale, which is that Iran was building a conventional umbrella to protect its nuclear program, which really amounts to the U.S. saying Iran can't have any methods of defense whatsoever, can't have missiles, can't have any way to protect itself. That also is not the basis for going to war, and that's why we and many others have said that this is illegal, that Congress needs to immediately vote and pull back from this building disaster.
All right, and before we continue, I need to bring you a message from Chicago State Company. If your dad is hard to shop for, stop overthinking it. Gift grill-worthy premium steaks. Today's sponsor is Chicago State Company, and the code is Dad's Day. DADSDAY. Father's Day gifts can be weird fast. You look at another mug, a gadget, or shirt, and none of it feels like him. A steak dinner is simpler. Chicago Steak Company lets you gift premium artisan-aged steaks Dad can put straight into his own grill night. Use code Dad's Day on qualifying orders of $179 or more, and the gift stack gets serious. A Best Grill and Dad apron, 16 free 6-ounce premium Angus steak burgers, signature steak seasonings, free standard shipping, and a $25 account credit after the package ships. Current value frame is $225. That's Chicago Steak Company at mychicagosteak.com. Use code DADSDAY, DADSDAY, link in the description. Well, folks, another week, another reminder that reality is stranger than anything Netflix could write. Trump is telling Israel to calm down. Activists are getting federal indictments over ICE operations. The Middle East is announcing another ceasefire, and somehow we're all expected to believe none of these stories are connected to bigger geopolitical chess games. Maybe they are, maybe they aren't. But one thing is certain. Whenever governments start talking about security, freedom, democracy, humanitarian missions, or even national emergencies, always, always, always follow the money. Then follow the power. Then follow the resources. Because eventually you'll find the real story. Thank you for joining me for another episode of the Sixth Sense News Report. I am Luna. Stay curious, stay skeptical, and remember, the truth isn't hiding. It's just standing somewhere nobody bothered to look. Good night, everybody.
I'm not your gossip girl, I'm the headline. Truth with a curve, baby, redefine. Welcome to the thirst trap. All the truth looks good in a tight wrap. We talk love, power, soul, and sin. Turn the world on, let the light in. Yeah, the thirst trap news. You'll drink it up, it's the real you. Where every headline's a revelation.
Stay tuned for the raid.